friends, welcome back to the unofficial companion podcast to HBO's hit show, Industry. I'm Jen.
I'm Kristen.
And we are picking up after the WTF moment of the last episode, which left us all in such a dark place. I am so happy that we're back, and we have an episode here that is very different than anything we've experienced. We're going to go on a trip with our characters, and the only other trips we've been on are like road trip with Yasmin and Robert. This is like,
and Sunderland.
Yeah, this is much more than a road trip. This is a trip, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. This is season 4, episode 5, and the title is Eyes Without a Face. Now, we are going to get into what the actual meaning of the title is, but I always think it's important to kind of recreate for you, the listener, the viewer, what the experience is for us coming to this as a watcher ourselves.
Yeah.
And for me, the second I saw that title, my immediate reference was the eyes from The Great Gatsby. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the book, it's about this like working class young man who through like a series of frauds breaks into high society by positioning himself as like this de facto nobleman and builds up this myth around himself. And throughout the book, they talk about this billboard on the highway, which is actually like an ad for an optometrist. And it's these eyes watching over everything that happens and unfolds throughout the view. But it's like this faded old ad.
I love, by the way, sorry, I just have to interrupt, the fact that I remember reading The Great Gatsby in school. I don't remember any of this. And I'm pretty sure that like the analysis that I did in my Weston High School English class did not cover this at all. So cool. I'm like now relearning things that I probably should have learned as a 12th grader.
Well, listen, so for me, this overlaid my entire experience watching the show because I was looking for this Gatsby narrative. And the eyes, what they kind of represent is like the voyeurism that we've been talking about a lot through the referendum on pornography that they've had. You know, we've also been talking about the experience of the viewer watching it. And then there's kind of this additional layer of meaning of what The Great Gatsby was about in the first place, which was the decay of the moral and religious framework that upheld American society that then crumbles in the face of the decadence and the capitalism and exuberance of the 1920s. So I think that that's what I came to this with, and I was kind of looking for that meaning throughout. I'm not saying I was right or wrong, but I think that it was a really interesting way to start the episode off because that's what I was looking for. And I think I could be entirely wrong with that reading. I think maybe some of you can come to my defense and prove that I was right, but we'll get to what it actually means and where it all goes.
My assumption was that it was more of almost like, not espionage, but we know that Whitney has been essentially listening in on people, watching and tracking people. So I thought it had something to do with that, which I actually don't necessarily think that that is the case.
But I don't think it's wrong either.
Maybe. Yeah. So anyway, all right. So this episode opens, it reminded me so much of like Your Friends and Neighbors, but you are outside of a school and you have Eric and his wife, Candace, who we met only in the very first season. He's there. And you hear Eric saying, school fucking failed her. And so we find out that she has essentially been kicked out of I assume like a boarding school.
Yeah, she was at a boarding school.
Eric's sitting there trying to argue that the reason that this happened is that I give her everything. She is never left wanting. And Candace is like, you give her everything except for your love and guidance. That's what they crave. And then he's sort of preoccupied with this as we go into the next scene.
Before we get there though, I mean, when we open up, I had come from such a dark place with the last episode. It starts with a bell tolling. And I was like, is this a funeral? It feels very funereal. And then when we cut to Eric and his wife, Candace, or I guess ex-wife in the car, it's interesting to note that A, Candace is in like a suit and Eric is in a sweatshirt. And B, based on how we were positioned with the camera, I think because they're in Britain, we've got Candace in the driver's seat and Eric in the passenger seat. Now, I'm not trying to like undermine feminism here or anything like that, but traditionally, when you think of a husband and wife driving together, you typically picture the husband in the driver's seat and the wife in the passenger seat. That's why we have the phrase like passenger princess. Like that's me in the car. I love being the passenger princess. I think it's interesting that in their relationship dynamic, we have it set up physically that Candace is in the driver's seat and Eric is kind of just along for the ride, and that she wears the suit in their relationship quite literally, and he wears this sweatshirt. And when they cut from Eric, they have Eric almost gazing off like he's totally dissociated from this moment. And the way the camera pans out, it pans onto this reflection in the window. And I was looking for like, what's he actually looking at? But then we do that weird time dilation move.
Right.
And he's still in that, zoned out face when we go back to the office.
Well, so my assumption is that this was sort of him in the office, like reflecting on what had just happened and still being there, even though presently he's supposed to be in this meeting. So
well, I think vice versa. When he's supposed to be having this conversation with his wife about their children, he's mentally in the office with his real family, Stern Tao.
Fair. So we then go into the Stern Tao offices, aka the hotel room, and we have Kenny on the phone. So he says, guys, I've been pretty pliant, but risk needs more margin on the tender position. My hands are tied. The whole team is there, Kwabana, Sweet Pea, Eric, all of them. Harper says, we've stuck to the risk limit that we agreed upon, 250 gross leverage, which, by the way, the 250 gross leverage, that I assume is a percentage. And so that's actually higher than the 200% we calculated previously. So this might mean they're even more.
I thought they meant 250 million. I have never heard anyone at a hedge fund talk this way. So this is all way outside my purview. I've only ever heard of people talk about their leverage in ratios. As far as like 2 to 1, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, 21, et cetera.
Well, and I will say the idea that anyone would go to like 200% gross leverage for a short position is absolutely insane. And we actually had someone who was giving us a little bit of pushback, like, this is a great position. Like, this makes sense. Like, the company could go to zero. And we've said before that when you talk about these short positions, the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent. So even if this is true, and we're going to find out that there's some very problematic issues with tender, even if it is true that the ultimate result is that tender is going to go to zero, there is, I would argue, a higher chance that it's going to go up and they're going to blow themselves up in the process of trying to make money on this short. It's like timing is everything. You can be correct that something is going to go down, but it doesn't matter. And that's why shorting is so freaking dangerous. But in this particular case, Kenny says, stock is up another 7% on Morgan Stanley's turbo bullish preview of the user uptake data for their new app. They've heavily beat their projections. And so with these shorts, when you are working with the prime brokerage division, every time the stock goes up, you need to continue to, well, depending on like when you hit your risk limits, but you need to post more collateral. And because they're like doubly negative, that 7% represents, they're losing 14% of the initial $250 million they put into the fund. So that's 35 million for that 7%. On top of, we assume that the stock price has already gone up in the meantime. So Kenny is saying our risk division wants to make sure that if you blow up, you can still essentially like pay for what you owe, hence why they have to continually keep posting this collateral.
Not to mention the fact that if the stock has moved that much and it's 35 million against them on their, we're assuming a $500 million position, we've blown through Eric's 10 million first loss. So and then some, right? Like he's out. He's just gotten wiped out.
Yep. And so Eric says, we can't wear this pain. I can't. Kenny says, you need to post more collateral or we will continue liquidating your other positions. Kwabana moves the lines and he was just like, what fucking positions? My positions? And Kenny says, positions this morning, your paired trades in the energy and utility names. Kwabana says, H, Harper, those were my positions. The only ones in our book making fucking money.
Well,
Harper says,
by the way, Harper said she wanted no other positions in this fund.
Yeah.
So originally it was, you can't do anything else, anyone. We can't even put on but let's just back up a sec. What the hell are pair trades in the energy and utility space? Kwabana is running a relative value book. Okay. A pair trade is a market neutral trade. And again, in rate space, we don't say pair trades, we say switches, but where you're basically long one bond, short another, or curve trades where you're long one part of the yield curve and short another. And you structure it so that if the whole market rallies or sells off, it doesn't impact your position in that switch. Aside from, again, in the rates world, you'll have convexity. So like whatever, you may need to make some adjustments. But like I've used this example before. Let's say you were doing this in like the tech stock names, which is what he should be doing, by the way, if it is in fact a hedge for their book, not in the energy and utility space, because that's not a hedge for tender. So let's say
unless this is also part of like the AI trade, in which case, like maybe.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if tender is using data centers. I don't think so. But let's say you wanted to express the view that Meta is going to outperform and Microsoft is going to underperform, right? You would buy Meta and you go short Microsoft. And what this means is that if the whole tech sector goes up or down, you don't care. All you care about is Microsoft going down more than Meta or Meta going up more than Microsoft. So the thing, though, is that relative value trades are typically extremely highly levered because you're not just playing for like up or down. You're playing for these relatively infinitesimally small, by comparison, differential changes between these two things. So you need to lever up in order to deliver a return that makes sense for the overall risk of your firm. So I'm totally baffled by the fact that Kwabana, you've got this already over-levered position in this short, and now we're taking on much more leverage to facilitate relative value trades for Kwabana.
Yeah, but I think that, I mean, like, this goes back to the point before, which is like, you can have funds that have much more leverage than like the 200% whatever that we see in this thing. The idea is like that particular short has that amount of leverage is like the insane part. But when you're looking at it from like the entire fund, right? If you were to look at it then it becomes potentially less crazy if you are more market neutral. Do you know what I mean? Like then if you have longs
But I don't think this makes them more market neutral. They've just added relative value positions that I don't think in any way, shape, or form, to your point, unless they're running AI data centers, are a hedge. If they had gotten long the tech sector as a hedge against their short, that's a different story. But they have market neutral relative value pair trades in the energy and utility sector. So all they're doing is levering up a ton on some, as far as I can tell, totally unrelated trades.
Yeah, I'm going to finish this thing and then I have a point I want to make. So Harper says, we needed headroom and your longs, hedges, whatever you want to call them, are not conviction positions. And they run counter to the philosophy of this fund. And Kwabana says, what philosophy? Bet big, lose the house. But this reminded me so much of Petra from season 2 and Anna, where Harper is like Anna, the dogmatic. This is a short only fund. We are only going to go with the philosophy of this fund. It is short only, blah, 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 blah. Kwabana reminds me of Petra, which is like, my freaking positions are the only things making money here. And so I don't know if that was on purpose that they were trying to almost position. I mean, like she's becoming almost evangelical about like only short only. And instead of back to the point I made, I think it was like last episode, they could be doing this in a much more responsible way. They can have conviction that tender is going to go to zero and they can structure the fund so that they're not betting it all on black and doing it in this insane, risky way where, again, double leverage, the entire position is in this one. I guess they have a little in this other stuff, but it's like, that's what's so insane about this. Yeah. But back to the point though, is I do think people, I don't want them to misunderstand what we're saying. We're not saying that using 200% leverage is insane, period. We're not saying that going short is insane, period. We are saying having your entire fund be only short only, having one position, have all of the money wrapped up in that, and then going doubly short on that one position betting on black. That is insane. That is almost like reckless. But if it was part of a bigger strategy where like they are taking smaller positions, or if they had more conviction on this because she's like, well, this is a huge conviction bet. Again, they don't know how they're going to monetize this. We find out later because ultimately what happens with Jinda. But this is just, in my opinion, just like a stupid trade.
Yeah, I think what you're referencing is the conversation you referenced earlier. Someone who's very senior within the fintech world reached out to us and was like, listen, the reason that tender is going to go to zero if the Sunderland story comes out is that is so illegal in the fintech space to not properly account for where all your payments are coming from, that were that Sunderland piece to air, that would be an immediate like, this thing is over, it's done, tender's going out of business. I don't know. I'm not a fintech expert, so this was someone's legal opinion. I think it's really interesting to get that color. And those of you who are fintech and tech experts, we welcome all of your insight. But I think at the end of the day, too, it also raises the interesting question that we've been coming back to, which again, we keep being like, all right, it seems like Whitney is doing some very nefarious stuff here that's been implied. We don't really know yet, but as we'll see, there's been the implication that something happened to his former assistant. We're about to find out what happened to Jim Diker. And it's like what they seem to be covering up in our minds has been built up to this huge nefarious scandal. And to us, we literally said when we were recording last week, it was like Deutsche Bank hit with another money laundering suit. It's like, oh, business as usual. This just happens all the time. So the idea that they were not properly accounting for their payments for us is like another scandal, whatever. Deutsche Bank doesn't seem like it's going to zero anytime soon. So why should tender? So it is almost a commentary through our reaction to it of how desensitized we have become to bad actors who are not following the laws.
By the way,
in the
you should watch
you
should watch Landman. There's so many illegal things in these big businesses. There's stuff that pushes the edge of the envelope. And I don't necessarily think it always takes the whole house down, even if it maybe
We're
should.
about to see. I mean, Kenny's next line, I'll just read it. Kenny says, spare me the tone. I'm nominally a friend, but the margin clerks here, they make Reinhard Heydrich look laissez-faire, okay? And you've breached your risk limits. I bought you a stay of execution. It's more than I owe you, really. There's another Nazi reference. He was a high-ranking SS officer who was like one of the architects of the Holocaust, who was so scary that Hitler called him the man with the iron heart. Like, he was too crazy for Hitler.
Yeah.
And this morning, Credit Suisse found like another, 1,000 accounts within their coffers of Nazis who had fled to Argentina.
Oh,
like, this is the year 2026, and we're still finding this. So, like, you know, the level of scandal and wrongdoing that we're used to, it spans decades in like the conventional
I think
world.
I think it's one of these things where there are definitely things that companies do that are illegal. Now, the question is that going to be for any company enough to take them down?
To zero.
And that's why I go back to this thing of like, is this enough for the investor community? Like, you get lawyers involved. And I mean, even back to what Whitney did in season 1, he had this contract with someone. The guy's like, we have a contract. He's like, I don't care. Let the lawyers fight it out. So that's why, to me, even if the Sunderland piece is illegal, which I assume it is, but
it definitely is.
Yes. Assuming that's illegal, is it enough to bring the company down? I don't know that it
didn't land with us that way for sure.
Right. But anyway, so we go on and Kenny says, you're going to have to post more collateral in the next 48 hours, 72 at the most, or I won't be able to stop your man liquidating tender 2. That or their share price sees a material sell-off. The world does not see the company the way you do, unfortunately. Gotta bounce, need it back on the desk, sorry. So TLDR, they don't have any more money, but they need to either come up with more collateral to keep their position running. And if not, they're gonna have to buy back at a higher price than they sold at, and they're gonna lose a shit ton of money. Eric's going to lose all of his $10 million and the fund's going to have to close down, essentially.
There's also this interesting progression that we've seen over the past 3 seasons that's gotten us here, where we had Harper with the wrong way trade, where she let her FX position run because she was like, non-farm payrolls will bail me out. And this was a loss of like $150,000, right? It's like, who cares? Then we had Rishi breaching his risk limits in the White Mischief episode with this FX position. And it was like 18 million, 35 million. Okay.
Yeah.
This was all kind of in-house. Now that we're outside of the relatively self-contained world of Pierpoint, we're seeing that like the world does not suffer. And by the way, like Pierpoint would have had to be such a poorly run bank to have all these things going on, which is fine. That's not necessarily inaccurate. But now we're in the real world where risk limits matter. Okay, you can't just be Harper and be like, maybe I'll just completely flout all the rules and see how it goes. Kenny is being the voice of reason. Like, that ain't how reality works, okay? So you can go be like, I'm going to be this badass short seller, blah, blah, blah. But there are rules, okay? Like, this ain't Nom. There are rules. Like,
so Harper then says to Eric, she says, Pierre emails asking me to speak at the Alpha conference, some bullshit women in finance presentation. Eric says more virtue capitalism, and Harper says seems low priority. Eric is like, it's not. Even if he wants you to go sew a bed net for every malaria kid in Mali, say yes. We need all the positive press we can get. So she nods and walks away.
Before we get to the next thing, I think it's really interesting, especially for the two of us who exist in this women in finance space that has really gone through all of these evolutions over the past, call it 30 years, and is still continuing to evolve. Like, where this show finds us this season especially is in the post-woke era of backlash. We had Lord Mostyn openly acknowledging that he was just using Harper as a modern face, which was awful. We had him gleefully throwing around the R word that you and I didn't even feel comfortable saying. And we've got Harper, who has always been antithetical to the performative DEI stuff. We know that she cares more about profit at any cost versus culture wars or any kind of noble sentiment. But I think it's really interesting that Eric basically is asking her to weaponize this women in finance thing, encouraging her to weaponize her femininity effectively, the same way that Yaz was encouraging Henry to weaponize his mental health for PR reasons in all the prior episodes. And I think it's really interesting too, in light of what we learned about Eric's actual daughter, which we'll get to, we'll find out what got her expelled. But we've got Harper, who's his de facto daughter, right? I think
I know.
that's not lost on any. And everything with his family is crumbling. And he's like, Harper, go weaponize this for our family here, the Stern Tao family, at whatever cost to you. It doesn't matter. Just get it done. So I just thought that was an interesting juxtaposition and something that I think the writers have done such a great job with throughout, especially in their crafting of Harper as a character. Whether they intended to or not, it's something that I love because it makes her so much more nuanced and powerful.
Yeah. So Harper nods and walks away. And then Eric asks Sweet Pea and Kwabana, so what's the move? And Sweet Pea says only one as she walks away from her computer. She says, now that Diker's piece has been nixed, you need to let me go to Accra and speak to Tender's CFO in Africa. We keep saying that we have conviction from fucking where exactly? So by the way, she's saying the same thing that we've been saying all along. Why do they have this conviction?
Well, especially, so now that the Sunderland thing can't be used, I think this is so critical.
That's
the
true.
one smoking gun they had, which we've now said 100% is illegal, has been confirmed by third parties, right? We all know that this is the big smoking gun. We are back to square one with this trade. This is a Hail Mary now to go to Africa and find this guy, Tony Day. That's it. That's all they have. So it's very clear that the stakes now are, we've got nothing.
I still think they could self-publish on the Sunderland piece. If she's going to this women in finance conference, why can't you say we have this thing? And by the way, we went and we found out this information about the Sunderland piece. I still think that they could have used that.
I'm with you. I think
I don't know why they couldn't
perceived
have
conflict of interest that Eric is so worried about is real, but also it's better than nothing.
Yeah. So I don't know why they couldn't just be we have this information. If this is enough to get the stock to correct, let's make sure that it's heard. Even if it's not coming out via Jim Diker, I still think that they could say, this is something that needs to be investigated more. This is what we have found out, and somehow disseminate it. I don't see how getting more incriminating evidence from Africa.
Wall Street Journal. I don't know. I'm totally with you. I think that there were other paths open to that.
But that's okay. Again, that's okay. I like the plot. So,
but also this is the first we hear of Jim Diker since the last episode. Although we already knew the article had been nixed, right? Because obviously Lord Norton got involved and made him stand
Eric Tao and the Culture Revolution. I still can't. So Harper then asks, do you have a plan there? Sweet Pea says, potentially. And Harper says, we owe it to Sweet Pea's work on this for her and I to travel there and we can sleep knowing we did everything that we could. Eric is not on board with this. He's basically, this is a high probability that nothing comes of this, while our CIO, so Harper, Chief Investment Officer, if you haven't heard that term before, is on a fool's errand while the fund is melting down around us. How do we spin that to Pea and Co., right? To Pea and our other investors. Harper then gets a call from a 607 number, and I looked it up. It's a 1607, so it's a U.S. number in South Central New York State.
It's Binghamton.
Oh, is it? Yeah. And also interesting that she doesn't have the number saved, but she walks out of the room.
For those of you who may not remember, she went to SUNY Binghamton.
Yeah, exactly, and grew up in New York State. So she walks out of the room. Kwabana now says, well, Diker's death, so we know he's now died.
Now we know he's dead.
Spooky coincidence, in a straight-to-video kind of way. Sweet Pea said the world is made of them. Eric says, I don't understand how Rishi happened to be acquainted with the journalist. Sweet Pea says, well, he sold the drugs, apparently. Kwabana says, and he's facing manslaughter charges, meaning Rishi. Sweet Pea says, I'm glad he found his way home. Kwabana's what the fuck does that mean? By the way, Harper starts to say something, but I want to finish what, in the background, you can see the dialogue. So when Kwabana says, what the fuck does that mean? We hear the other conversation. Sweet Pea says, his behavior means he's found his way to the most rational place for him. And I speak from trauma and experience. And Eric then says he was a very retrograde human. Kwabana says, I know someone who isn't me has on occasion frequented the onion router, and it seems off to me that coke procured on the dark web would have fentanyl in it. Eric says it seems sloppy, and Sweet Pea says, well, Rishi was fucking sloppy. And then she says, Harper, I'm booking us on the next BA, so British Airlines to Accra. But so we now, know that the coke that he did was laced with something, which was our speculation last time. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And B, that Rishi is now the one who is going to be taking the fall for Jim Diker dying.
Yeah, so I think there's so much here. First of all, for those who didn't get the reference, because I didn't, the onion router is a reference to, it's called Tor. Tor stands for the onion router, which is a network that anonymizes internet traffic. So basically it wraps whatever you're doing in multiple layers of encryption and then routes it through all these random global nodes. It hides what you're doing. So apparently Kwabana's been on the dark web. Okay, that's weird. But more importantly, this is a wild conversation because let me get this straight, okay? Sweet Pea's about to hop on a plane to Accra, to chase down this gut instinct that this company is covering up something more nefarious than Sunderland, okay, due to the way you found their payments being processed, the journalist who was about to publish this story has died in a spooky coincidence. What? Why are you like so blasé about this? Because to me, this confirms that one of two things happened. Either, as you suspected, the music man from the last episode was an agent sent by Whitney, and Rishi just happened to be there. Or potentially, I went back and actually rewatched again for a fourth time that awful scene. Both Rishi and Jim Diker were snorting the coke. And immediately the first piece of dialogue that we have upon getting to the apartment is the music man goes, "That one's on me." So he clearly supplied that coke, but Rishi was doing it too. So I guess, like, did they come in separate baggies? Because we do see, I was like doing a forensic analysis of this scene, because like if the drugs actually came from Rishi and they were laced, like that doesn't really make sense, because like has Rishi just like built up a tolerance to fentanyl? I don't think so. So Rishi would have gone down too. So then that made me wonder, is Rishi—
Well, maybe they weren't trying to kill him. Oh, you're thinking maybe it was like,
was Rishi in fact stumbling upon Jim Diker because he was no longer in the employ of Harper, but now perhaps in the employ of Whitney? And so then I was like, again, this is me going way too into it, because we talked about this in the last episode. From watching that episode, I was like, I don't see, especially now that we know he's in jail awaiting trial for manslaughter, I don't really see a path for Rishi coming back, except, and again, I have not watched ahead, so this is my totally wild theory. The only path that I could see back for redemption for Rishi is if he were in fact working for Whitney, and he could be the smoking gun that Whitney hired me to kill Jim Diker. I don't think so, though, because Rishi seems shocked that he has overdosed on fentanyl and like is like, oh no, I'm gonna get caught.
My guess is that he just didn't do as much coke. You saw Jim Diker do a lot more. And
no,
I think
Rishi went to the bathroom to snort his own stash.
But I think that was his own stash. Right, but that's my point. Jim Diker from the little, like you saw him doing way more of the coke that was on the music man.
That was given.
Than Rishi. Rishi did like maybe one line, and then they're having this conversation. He's focused on his Diana, like, you know, memories and everything. While he's having that conversation, again, dissociated, Jim Diker is continually doing more and more coke. And then he's like, he's out. And then Rishi goes to get his own stash. Yeah. So that's the clean one. So I think he probably just didn't do enough.
Both Rishi's and his own that was laced with fentanyl. So they were both laced with fentanyl.
But I don't think it was separate. I think the guy probably just like bought like one thing laced with fentanyl. I think it's unclear whether the goal was murdering Jim Diker, scaring the shit out of Jim Diker, getting him hospitalized, getting like the cops to come. Because again, it's still illegal to be doing coke. Getting thrown in jail. So I think that was probably potentially more of the goal than murder, but I don't know.
Get an answer here, but yeah. I think what this does though is, to me, in my mind at least, this closed the door to Rishi, unless it was some wild plot where he can all of a sudden blow the whistle on tender, is my view.
Yeah, got it. All right, so as they're having this conversation, Harper had that call from the 607 number, and you hear the person on the other side of the phone say, "I'll phone when I know more, speak soon." Harper hangs up, and she now looks like she's seen a ghost. She walks into the room, as Sweet Pea had said, "Harper, I'm booking us on the next Pea to Accra." Harper says, "Maybe I should stay," as Eric says, "It's more responsible for me." Sweet Pea's like, "Sure, whatever. You don't have to follow through, but my plans are unchanged." And Eric now notices that Harper has, like I said, she looks like she's seen a ghost. She seems completely out of it. He's like, "Are you good?" And Harper makes up a lie. She's my landlord, unpaid service charge, but a flip has been switched. Eric says, "Sweets, I don't think it's wise for you to go alone." So Kwabana says, "It's not live and let die out there." Basically, like, this isn't the jungle. She's going to be fine. Like, this isn't like super dangerous.
Live and Let Die is a James Bond movie. It's one of the Roger Moore movies. And it was a movie where like the villain was a dictator of a fictional Caribbean country who effectively was illegally running an opium poppy farm there. And his intent was to flood the market with drugs back in Harlem to wipe out all the drug dealers and become like the monopoly source in that drug market. And it's part of like peak what's referenced now today, blaxploitation. So it was all of these racist tropes about like voodoo rituals and things like that. And like there's very derogatory portrayals of Black culture. So Kwabana is implying that Eric's aversion to Sweet Pea going to Ghana alone is almost like racially motivated. And I think, like, by the way, it's the kind of thing where it forces you as the viewer to, because I know nothing about Ghana, right?
Me
And I
neither.
think that there is this moment for someone who doesn't know anything about Ghana to be like, wow, we've got this white blonde woman, Sweet Pea, who is totally comfortable just like hopping on a plane, going to an African country, versus if she was like, I'm going to Germany, you wouldn't think twice. But so I went and looked it up, and like, here is Ghana by the numbers. Okay. So just confronting my own ignorance about this. It's on the west coast of Africa. As of 2024, the population was 35 million. Apparently English was the official language, at least according to Wikipedia, but there's like 80 or so other indigenous languages. And it was the first sub-Saharan African colony to gain independence from Britain in 1957. It is a majority Christian country, 80-20 Christian Muslim. And it's basically consistently ranked as one of the safest countries in all of Africa, alongside Rwanda and Mauritius. So
Oh, interesting.
my like personal lack of knowledge, I wanted to go out and solve for that before seeing Ghana, because I think Ghana like actually seems like an awesome place to visit.
Yeah. Although I will say, just in defense of Eric, I mean, you even made the point, like, how insane is this that the freaking journalist trying to hunt down information about this company gets potentially murdered? So I do think there's a little bit of like, maybe don't go like on this fishing expedition alone. But I hear you on, was it, to Kwabana's point, because it's Ghana, or was it because like, hey, some people who were investigating this shit just turned up dead? Is this
And
maybe not super safe?
Certainly, I think Kwabana's reaction is evocative of that line from the very first episode where Harper and Kwabana are sleeping together. And she's like, didn't you fantasize about Sweet Pea, like this pristine white woman? And it is bringing up those terrible racial tropes of black man, white woman, this thing that like people were so culturally afraid of. It's just awful stuff, right? And that's what Kwabana, I think, whether
is reacting to.
That's what he's reacting to.
Which is
and
fair.
I'm so glad you brought up that point with the journalists being attacked, because it takes us back to our Wirecard story. So I think with finding out that Jim Diker is dead, for me, was the nail in the coffin of this being a very dark tale on something that actually was highlighted for us in that Bloomberg article that I read, and then by one of our German followers. So for those of you who don't know what happened with Wirecard and the journalists, I guess the two journalists at the FT who dug into Wirecard, which was basically like a German version of Tinder, the two journalists were called Dan McCrum and Stefania Palma. They were at the FT. So first, they were threatened with Wirecard initiating legal action with like a massive show of force from a bunch of high-powered corporate lawyers, which is exactly what we saw Tinder do with Louisa, right? It was like big, strong response. We're going to sue you, like legal action, right? Then, according to an article I read, Wirecard allegedly placed a bunch of false stories in far-flung media outlets, and then went to the press being like, look at this article that you can now cite that basically like could discredit these journalists. And the implication in all those articles was that they were working together with short sellers. So like it was implied that they had either corrupt or paid sources. Then these reporters later described hacking attempts, electronic and physical surveillance, attempted bribery. According to the Global Investigative Journalist account of McCrum's experience, he used an air-gapped device, just like we saw Jim Diker doing. And then finally, once the FT actually published in 2019, the German authorities stepped in on Wirecard's behalf. And so the German financial regulator, I'm going to try to say this, I'm so sorry, it's the Bundesanstalt für Finanzdienst.
Good job, Jen. Good job.
BaFin, okay, for short. They filed a criminal complaint against them, which framed all of their reporting as market manipulation in collusion with short sellers, and then went on to ban short selling of Wirecard stock altogether. So,
whoa.
Yes. So truth is so much stranger than fiction. I'm so glad I looked into this story.
Sorry, the idea of banning short selling, I was like, holy shit. By the way, that also did happen during the Great Financial Crisis.
Yes, but not on one specific
No,
name.
It was on financial stocks.
Yeah,
but
so
yes.
can you imagine? Yeah. And so ultimately, if you remember back to our earlier episode, I had just looked up the Cliffs Notes on Wirecard, that ultimately what happened is that they had $2 billion missing and they ultimately collapsed. So when they published, obviously the criminal charges against these poor journalists were dropped. But this is so much crazier than anything the authors have written so far, but it's clearly what's playing out here. I think we need no further evidence that this is what this season is based on.
Mm. So Eric, like we said, Eric has said he doesn't think that it's wise for Sweet Pea to go alone. So Kwabana says, fine, maybe I should go. What use am I here? Someone saw it appropriate to unilaterally liquidate my book, which, by the way, is a big deal. I mean, this is like he's a traitor. So like the idea that someone just come in and just do that, like not even tell him. It would be one thing to be like, hey, this is antithetical to our fund. You need to initiate this, but to go behind his back, I think is like kind of messed up. So Sweet Pea then says to Kwabana, do you know Accra well? He says, I used to go 4 times a year. And by the way, Eric is looking at Harper as we hear him saying this. He's kind of like trying to watch her reaction. He says, then I used to go once every 4 years and now sort of never. Big extended family. I'm not sure what you side be, but he does actually know it. And I think that having someone who knows the place, even if it's like you've only been, I mean, that's actually huge. I mean, for me, like if I have to go
you have to come
anywhere,
to Charlotte. You're like, hey, Jen, where should I go? Right? Like it's not.
So Harper, whatever, says, I think you both should leave. She doesn't want to hear this. She's obviously preoccupied. And she just says,
I think there's like such a childishness to this interaction where Kwabana's like, maybe I should go. And she's like, fine, maybe you should. It's like, oh, why don't you just marry her then? You know, like it's kind of this really childish little back and forth between them that is on the surface about trading, but feels like it has undertones about their relationship, that he is almost like choosing Sweet Pea over her in terms of where he's going to go because Harper has burned him. And this is not the first time Harper has burned him. She has continually tried to push him away. And he's like, dude, you know what? Like, fine.
Yep, I will go. But that's why I think, again, Eric is like looking at Harper to see her reaction. And she says, I think you should both leave. And then she just goes, if that's what you want to do, that's my final decision. And so
like,
the music.
This decision. He said he was going to go. Like,
I know.
Not your decision, Harper.
No, but the music then turns a little bit ominous. And so And
as Eric's watching all this, he is, I don't have one here, he's throwing a baseball.
Yeah.
And I think it's really interesting that Eric has gone from baseball bat to ball. Meaning, when he had the bat, right, he was running the desk at Pierpoint, and that was like his thing that he was constantly swinging around, and he was in control as head of the desk. Here at Stern Tau, even though he's trying to assert himself as the fatherly figure, I think this little visual reminder is that he's the ball, not the bat, who is effectively being wielded by Harper.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Okay, so the next scene, it's now a little bit later. It's darker. We see Eric and Harper.
We did the time skip again because we end the scene on Harper's face, and then all of a sudden it's like the lights go out, and now it's nighttime.
Yeah.
She has been totally dissociated, just like Eric was totally dissociated. It was Eric getting the news about his daughter getting expelled, and then he was back to the office. Harper has gotten some mysterious news now, and now she's in the office.
Yep. So they're sitting there, they're eating, it's darker, and Eric says, eat something. Harper says she's not hungry, and Eric is just like, what the hell has gotten into you? And Harper says, you joined this fund to run ops, that was your experience. Keeping the music playing is an operational issue. Now, she's essentially saying, this is your fault that the fund is imploding because your job is to make sure that we don't.
Just to be clear, when she says ops, that doesn't mean back office. She basically means if she's the CIO and he's the COO. At a small hedge fund, they are basically like neck and neck, equal partners.
Yeah. But so Eric says, this fund put one position up in lights, staked its reputation. That position was your choice and remains so. It has not worked. So in other words, again, the reason that they're fundamentally breaking down, it's not operational. It's because the investment is not working. So Harper says, what are our options? Eric says, pull back our gross exposure and get back inside our risk limits. Harper says, liquidating the other names in Kwabana's book did just that, but it's not going to appease them enough. Eric then pointedly asks her, what do you think your head trader thought of you expunging his positions without consent? And again, I liked that without consent because it kind of goes back to all the like pornography discussions we've had. He says, those the actions of a good boss? And Harper's just like, she gets so triggered here where she's like, you're such a hypocrite. She then suggests, what about an equity infusion? Emergency cash raise? And Eric is like, we've scraped the bottom of the barrel just getting, I mean, honestly, I'm shocked that they got the extra 150 million on top of Pierre. So he's like, we were barely able to raise money as we were. There's no why now for fresh blood. So in other words, there's no story that they can sell to get the dollars in.
Yep.
And so Harper says, well, what about a Hail Mary, a leveraged binary trade? And so my assumption here, I actually had not heard of leveraged binary trades. Is that something you're familiar with in like the fixed income
trades
world?
Are just like, let's say you buy a call option on a stock that is struck at $100. You get to expiry and the stock is trading at 75. Your option expires worthless. But there's a certain amount of money that you can make above that strike. You could make $20 above the strike. You could make $50 above the strike, et cetera, et cetera. A binary option is like, it is or it isn't. And it's either a big payday or it's nothing at all.
Well, I guess the way to think about it, it's like we're about to have the Super Bowl. By the way, this is going to be airing on Friday because the Super Bowl is Sunday. And so you could decide, again, Jen and I are Bostonians. And so we could be like, you know what? We want to bet on the Patriots. You bet on the Patriots, you win. Patriots don't, you lose. But it's not, to your point, it's not like a sliding scale of, the share price does better and better. You make more and more.
Yep.
It's just either you win it all, you lose it all.
Speaking of the Super Bowl, by the way, Drake May went to Myers Park High School, literally like walking distance from my house.
Oh, cool.
Why he's not the quarterback of the Carolina Panthers is beyond me. It's so sad.
All right. So Eric then says, I'm not letting you play craps. Like, this is the thing. This is gambling. We have these conversations all the time. Is it trading? Is it investing? Is it like she is gambling.
100%.
And he says, I'm not letting you play craps. Okay. I've given you enough mileage. My 10 million first loss is already on the pyre. It's gone.
Yep.
Although if they do win big, I mean, like he could get it back.
Of course, there's always a path to getting it back, but it's like, are you just going to let it ride forever? You can't.
Right. And so Harper says she now is digging. She says, you think if you leave your girls some money, they're going to love you? And
in the
Eric
words of Clueless, I was like, oh, that was way harsh, Ty. Like,
Yeah,
oh my
seriously.
God.
awful. And Eric is just silent for a moment because, by the way, he has been having obviously these huge feelings of regret and just like disappointment himself and feeling like a failure. And he's just like, Harper, how is that even an appropriate segue? And Harper says, give me a fucking break. You've become too timid. And Eric is like, what am I doing here with you? Because she wants to hurt other people right now. That's all she cares about. And Harper says, I could ask you the same thing. Your experience has amounted to fucking naught. You are not useful to me. And Eric is just like, well, that's what this is. And Harper says, you have no idea how lucky you are to have people who expect your love. No, demand your love. And you don't feel worthy, so you can't give it. Nothing between us is going to fix that for you. She stands up and storms out. And Eric is just sitting there like stunned. Like, what the fuck?
Because back to that line that I think it was Yasmin said, I think all children were meant to kill their parents. Eric and Harper's relationship has been the proxy for the relationship that he can't, for whatever reason, manage to have with his children. And I keep thinking of that line from last season that he said, where he was like, I keep looking to the women in my life and seeing in them what I want my daughters to become. And his failures as a father seem conflated with his failures with Harper. She is constantly playing the part of the petulant child, and he's constantly playing the part of the patient father. He seems to have almost infinite patience with Harper, who is
which
just
is
like
wild.
lashing out and lashing out and lashing out. And the question is like whether that's because he feels like he has nothing left after her. Like, not
I
just
have a
the
different
job,
theory, but
but like that if this doesn't work out for him, that's it for him as like the great experiment of being a father, period, full stop.
I have a different theory, but I want to wait till we get to where they have that conversation together.
Ooh.
So next scene, Eric is outside on the balcony, horns are honking, and it's, by the way,
he goes out on the balcony. I was like, he better not throw himself off this damn balcony. Okay, I can't handle like another suicidal impetus.
No, but he's outside on the balcony and he's looking at his recent calls and he goes to almost try to like call his daughter, like the word Lily is right there. And then he gets an inbound. It says, Dolly, hotel girl. And he thinks about whether to answer it. He does. The hotel girl says, hey, honey, I'm in the bar. Are you coming down? And he responds with, don't call this number again. Basically like making the correct choice, like not going to sleep with a prostitute. And hopefully, we don't know if he like is calling his daughter, but hopefully, because then we get into the upbeat music and we then go to Accra. But any other commentary?
No, to me, my mind immediately went to, I know this sounds crazy, but like I'm now in this very conspiratorial place. So I was like, was this a prostitute that was hired by Whitney to seduce Eric and get inside information from Stern Tower to feed back to Tender? Because I'm now like so wildly suspicious of everyone. And I also think though that this is such a great stark contrast to last season. Remember when everything was falling apart for Eric, he fell straight into the arms of the prostitute at the cop conference. This is an Eric who like looks that option in the eye and rejects it. So I'm like, oh, is Eric showing growth? Like, good for him, I guess.
Yes. Well, and I will say we have not seen any gross sex scenes with Eric yet this season. We haven't seen him drinking. We haven't seen him with prostitutes. He has been sort of like the fatherly figure, like the father hen amongst this little gaggle of the company and has been supportive of them. So we're already in this is episode 5. We're over halfway through the season and like no gross Eric. Again, last season, I was so upset with some of the stuff with Eric. And this season, he's rather hinged, right? If last season was unhinged. Anyway, I don't know if that's actually a word, but I made it up. So anyway, We now go, again, it's upbeat industry music, and we see Sweet Pea and Kwabana getting out of a car in Accra.
It looks lovely, by the way. Like, this
Beautiful.
is a gorgeous hotel.
So Kwabana says, what's the plan for today? And so Sweet Pea says, I had a Zoom set up with Tender Tony Day, but I updated him to change it to being in person because I'm here. She tells him that she essentially spun a story about how they are meeting with some other potential prospects because they're doing diligence on a bunch of different companies. She says she also wants to visit Tender's lack of acquisition before their pivot, which was a company, as we know, called Swift GC. And so Quabbin is like, he does not think that this is going to be a fruitful trip. He says, you're digging for gold in a sandbox. And she looks kind of annoyed. You also see that, like, she kind of has no use for him. She's like, why the fuck are you on this trip? You don't believe in what I'm doing. She says, I would be happy to not see you for the duration of this trip. She walks to the right, leaves him, it then zooms out. But to your point, you see this gorgeous looking hotel, this pool, and the words industry appear on the screen with the hot pink, which, yeah. We from here then go back to Stern Tow. It's next morning, and Eric is looking through his laundry. Harper walks in, again, still kind of ghostly face. And Eric is kind of like you have a fight with someone, but you want things to be back to normal. So he's talking about his laundry expenses and how much money he's spending, which, by the way,
paying $100,000 a month to live here, which I was wondering that myself, by the way. I was like, dude, not only are you guys down huge, but your run rate for just this freaking hotel room
that's $1.2 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot that they're paying, which in fairness would be both his living expense and the office space. But anyway, Eric then says, why are you up so early? Have you given yourself the night to come up with an appropriate fucking apology? Because now he's basically like, you better apologize for being so terrible to me. And Harper just shell-shocked says, my mom died. My brother called me from New York yesterday to say that there'd been an accident and she just went overnight. And Eric is all of a sudden like, oh shit. And he's like, you can talk to me about it. So he like kind of motions her over. They sit down. Again, he's still in his bathrobe.
In the bedroom too, by the way. Like, they're not sitting in the office part. They're sitting in the bedroom part while he's in. And it's this very fatherly thing. Like, you can talk to me about it. He doesn't seem excited by this news. So I don't want to give the wrong impression here, but he seems relieved almost. Like that.
Well, yeah, that there's a reason.
So like it's about
like so mean else. To him. Mm-hmm. And so Harper comes in. She says, that's a point. I don't know what to say. I don't know how to feel. She was awful to me because it goes back to season 1. They had this horrible torture relationship. Like basically the mom messed up the brother so badly that her twin brother couldn't love her, was incapable of loving her. And she says that was the only love she ever knew. So I think they're trying to also paint like, where did Harper come from? And I think that this is also really important in the context of what happens with her in Kwabana, which is like the only love she ever had as a child was the love that she had from her brother. And she essentially blamed her mom for fucking her brother up so that her brother wouldn't even love her after that. And she says, the only love that I remember was his love. And Eric says, what else do you remember? Harper says resentment. Actually, I think it's hate. And Eric says, they can be good motivating principles, right? Hate and resentment. Harper says, until they're not. And Eric says, until they're not, which obviously he's probably thinking about Lily at this point. And so Harper then comes, sits down next to him on the bed. And Eric is just like looking down. Harper says, she fell down the stairs running for an Amazon delivery. And they kind of laugh as they're saying this. And Eric's just like, you're joking. And Harper's like, I'm not.
Well, back to what Yasmin said about death being procedural. Like, this is this ignoble way to die that is so horrible. And it does sound like this woman was horrible from Harper's standpoint. I'm also, though, not 100% sure what this woman did, because we also know that Harper's a total sociopath. So I do struggle to reconcile who Harper is now with what this mother must have been like. We know that she wasn't supportive of Harper in this career path or anything like that. But in hearing all this, I do think that Eric is internalizing what Harper's saying, wondering if this will be how his daughters think of him.
I 100% agree with that. Yeah. And so Eric then says, I know this pales in comparison. My daughter got herself expelled. They threw her out of a school for little monsters for being a little monster. Harper asks, what did she do? And Eric says she was the ringleader of a group that catfished a peer, pretended to be a boy, made this girl travel for a date, encouraged her to dress provocatively, and took pictures of her when nobody showed. Meticulous fucking cruelty. Harper says, pretty dark. And Eric says, so are the pictures. A child dressed like a hooker waiting.
Yeah, there's this element there of almost implied child pornography, like the idea that this image was used without this girl's consent for the most nefarious of purposes. That actually reminds me of the plot from Euphoria, where like everyone's using various pictures that people have or haven't taken willingly or whatever to set them up with this threat of child pornography laws are going to come down upon you. And that's why I have this blackmail or whatever. But like, let's take a step back and think like, what are we supposed to think not only of a society where young children are doing cruel things like this? Where can it possibly go from here when they become adults? Like if this is normalized in the realm of the 16-year-olds or 14-year-olds or however young
They're
this
supposed to be
girl
14.
is. Yeah, exactly. When we then think about Sweet Pea's pornographic content being used without her consent that she talks about as that trauma previously. Yeah, we don't have that full insight yet, but what she has referenced, think about the trauma that this girl is being set up with from the age of 14. Like it's so young and it's this escalating stakes.
Yeah. And so Harper says, my brother and I were problematic at her age too. Now, you and I talk about this all the time, but I do think things have changed. I mean, you and I are millennials. We never had to deal with stuff like this because iPhones were not a thing.
Right.
And I think for you and I being parents now, it literally terrifies me that our kids are going to go through this world where everything is on the phones. High school is hard for everyone. I think there's very few people who are like, go into high school and would ever want to repeat that experience. But for it to then now be played out on the internet and via social media, where it's one thing if it's like, you're not invited to a party, whatever, sitting home watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer because like your friends didn't invite you. Then having to then deal with stuff like this is just a whole nother level. I mean, granted, I think watching Euphoria is also terrifying.
Yeah.
Anyway, Eric then says, imagine swallowing such cut and dry evidence of your failure as a father. What I feel for my kids should be celestial, metaphysical, but instead it's what have you done for me today? I know when I'm with them, it's the only place I should be, but I don't want to be there. It's a sick thing to look at an innocent kid and think, yeah, I'm an animal that works on attention. And no, you don't hold mine. It feels like a betrayal of something very ancient.
I see it as we're told that the legacy you leave through your children is the most powerful thing you can do. This is that ancient thing of legacy, succession, who is going to be heir to your genetic makeup, to whatever you've built in your life. And that's supposed to give you the meaning in life. And I think increasingly, as society has become more fragmented, as everything has moved away from these traditional values, the reality is a lot of people don't feel that way. It's a very ugly thing to talk about with yourself, but I do think that you see this play out day to day where there's parents sitting at their kids' thing and they're like this. Myself included, by the way.
Right.
I'll be at a kid's baseball game. I'll be at whatever it is. And I'm like, hey, listen, when my kid's not up to bat, sometimes I'm doing work on my phone and that's okay. Because it doesn't always feel like this poetry, like this grandeur, that parenting is this like gritty thing. And you know what? For everyone, it's not the big meaningful thing that it should be. However, I do think that
let's get gritty for a second. Like literally in the past 24 hours, I was cleaning poop off of some sheets. I was cleaning throw up off of multiple sheets and clothes and stuff. So the thing is like the reality of kids, again, like it is true that they are so wonderful and amazing and all this stuff. There is like the sort of shit that you deal with, not even pun included. And then when you can have at your fingertips your phone that is very much keeping your attention and sucking you in, that you then, when you're in the real world with your kids, who should be the most important things, speak of the devil.
Right on cue. We should keep that in.
Right on cue. Yeah. Here, hold on. Sorry, guys. Little interruption there. But if you're a parent, there's the lows, and it's not, again, a freaking dopamine hit every second of every day. And so I do think there's probably a lot of parents who are like, yeah, I had kids, and you do feel this amazing connection to it. And yet you're still getting sucked in to other things that are more, I don't want to say like interesting.
I think it's just that though. I think it's about these lines in concert with what they say next that show how both of them are struggling to feel what they're supposed to feel. Like my husband always says, somebody's got a case of the supposed does. And it's not just about Eric in a vacuum, not feeling like the father he's supposed to be. I think once you read the next lines, we can talk about what it means then in terms of how Harper's feeling.
Yeah. So Harper does say to him, it's not lost on you picked a hyper-transactional career where the transactions aggregate to zero. Eric nods and says, they don't make me feel substantial, obviously meaning about his kids. And Harper's just like, they really should, obviously thinking kind of probably about herself and her interactions with her mom. Eric is just looking down. And Harper then says, I'm very fucking annoyed at how empty I feel. This whole fucked up situation with the fund is denying me my grief.
It's like now Harper's saying, oh, there's this situational block that's keeping me from grieving the way that I should be. But no, actually, she doesn't feel any grief, not because of what's going on with the fund. It's not like, oh no, I'm so stressed about my short, I can't possibly grieve my mom. She didn't have love towards this woman. So she's grieving, but not in the terms of the loss of what was, but it's the loss of the relationship she could have had with her mother if it had been a healthy relationship. Just as Eric is now forced to grieve the type of relationship he theoretically should and could have had with his daughters, that he can conceptualize philosophically, but which doesn't exist in reality. So the idea that they both have this emptiness inside of them when it comes to their relationships, that the only thing that makes them feel anything is the job and is each other.
Yeah. And so Harper then says, I ran through all these scenarios in my head of what it would be like to see her again. Eric asks, would you imagine? And Harper says that she would have no fucking choice but to fall to her knees and beg for my forgiveness because I had become fucking undeniable. And Eric says, you are undeniable. And Harper then just starts to cry and Eric holds her hands, obviously in a very fatherly way.
But what they both want is acknowledgement. She just wants acknowledgement that she is talented and that she is right. She doesn't even want her mom to love her. She wants an apology almost, or like a recognition of her greatness.
But she wants her mom to recognize that. And I think that's the thing because
and so she gets it from Eric, and that's why I think she suddenly starts to cry.
Yeah, you've seen that she's always wanted to win. And you even saw in the first episode where she got the birthday card from her mom. I mean, here she is. She's running a freaking hedge fund. She's badass Harper. You see this transformation of her in her clothes. And it's like she has won, but like she hasn't, because as her mom says, guess you got everything you wanted. It was never, you are so successful. It was,
she was never going to get that acknowledgement from her mom because her mom doesn't care.
Yeah.
So it's not that she's denying that Harper isn't great. It's just she doesn't care. This doesn't mean anything to her. So Harper is looking for love in all the wrong places. She's looking for her mother's love in all the wrong places. If this short works out, it was never going to be, you know what? Now you're great, Harper. And the people who've been acknowledging her greatness, have they though? It was Automasta being like, you're
Eric
great,
has.
but actually you're just the face for my fund. I think that she hasn't really gotten that. And Eric is the only person who has been able to give her that validation that she wanted.
Yeah. From here, we then go back to Accra, and it opens with some upbeat music. And I will say, it's funny how, like, again, in Accra, it's always like the upbeat music. And I feel like back at home, it's like kind of the ominous music. So Sweet Pea is walking through the streets and she's looking for an address for Swift GC. So she finds, I guess, a store. She walks in and she asks the man, where is Swift GC? And he goes, over there. And he points her at a switchboard. And Sweet Pea's like,
I think it's a wall of P.O. boxes.
Oh, maybe. Okay. Anyway, so Sweet Pea's like, let me clarify. I'm looking for the office. The guy goes over there and points to, and to your point, actually it would make sense that like pointing to the P.O. box.
That's the address that she looked up. Yeah.
Yeah. And Sweet Pea then looks at the man and she says, Google didn't have a number attached. Do you have one by any chance? And he ignores her. And then she goes into his wallet. It's like, what, a $20 bill? Like, would that maybe influence you? He writes something on a piece of paper and hands it to her. She looks at it and smiles, and then she dials what must have been the phone number, and she gets the Dublin call center. Now, I thought it was a switchboard because I thought she was then looking to see if anything lit up.
What year is this that we have switchboard?
I don't know. All right, so then Dublin call center. Nobody do with the ominous music. So from here, we then go and we see Kwabana. He's sitting in a gorgeous lobby, by the way. Sweet Pea marches in. And she says, I have a meeting at 11 a.m. with Tony Day, Moston Asset Management. So she's basically giving them a false fund name. And the woman says, okay, if you sit, I will let him know when you're here. So she goes over, Kwabana is sitting there, and he yells to the woman, is the AC not working? And the woman says, sorry.
Well, I do think it's interesting that, okay, we have seen this beautiful Accra. We've seen the beautiful hotel. We now see this beautiful office lobby, but the AC is not working. Like, that's kind of a weird thing. Think about it if you were a $50 million company. You know, the odds that you'd be in an office building where the air conditioning isn't working in a tropical environment seems low. Imagine being in Miami and like the air conditioning going out at Citadel, right? Like, no, okay? So I do think it's giving us this impression, piecemeal, that everything's not quite as it seems. Yeah. We've got Swift GC's offices that are really just some like, you know, propped up storefront. We've got this beautiful hotel lobby, but the air conditioning's not working. There's this beautiful facade and there's this seedy underbelly to it.
Yeah. So Sweet Pea then sits and she tells Kwabana that she went to Swifty and there's no office there. She says that their supposed direct line just goes to the Dublin call center. And Kwabana's like, you think that's strange? You're calling this number and it goes to the parent company? Like, that seems normal. So Sweet Pea's annoyed that he's not like acknowledging the sketchiness of what she has found. Now, by the way, time then passes, but like there is no indication at all that that has happened here. It just like literally.
The indication is that they start to look sweatier.
Yes, and Sweet Pea looks at her watch, but there's no anything. Again, like we've said before, there's a lot of time passing that like they don't signal. So I do think it's so interesting. So Kwabana says, how long have they kept us waiting? And Sweet Pea says it's closing in on 2 hours. Kwabana suggests maybe it's a power move. But then you see Tony Day walk through the lobby. And so he was never going to meet with these people. He's probably like on the lobby out the door to get lunch or something. And Sweet Pea jumps up and she's like, Mr. Day, Moss and Asset Management, shakes his hand. And he says, pleasure. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to blow you off. Like, yes, you did. And Kwabana jumps up. It's by the way, he's like just standing next to Sweet Pea. And he says, no problem. Do you have 15 minutes? And he goes, I'll give you 5. So they then go up to the office and Sweet Pea starts to tell him about this reconnaissance that she's doing on an investment case and tender. And like I said, she has some other potential investments in the region. She says they've been buy and hold for some time, meaning they just buy these companies, right? They're not shorting. They're just buying these company names and then they hold it. Like that's the traditional kind of like buy and hold long. Mm-hmm. Tony says, yes, you and everyone else, although being a stock market darling does come with some challenges. Obviously talking about tender, the fact that everyone like loves them and everything is amazing. So Sweet Pea says, I guess they must look after you, expecting you to put roots down so far away from home. Kwabana says, couldn't they have given the job to a local? And Tony Day, who is a white British man, replies in, I guess, whatever the native language is, I've lived here for 15 years. I am a local.
I think this is like a racial commentary of like, okay, you're being inserted as this white colonizer. Why wasn't this job given to someone local who has the knowledge on the ground of the local communities and stuff like that? And I do think it's interesting during this meeting. They have glistened these actors up with sweat. So you can see that like there is this.
Well, Kwabana's just drinking. Well, no, he's continually.
Back to the power play. If you recall from your favorite show, Succession, whenever they have meetings or whenever there's a family gathering, there's so much food and so much opulence. And it's a thing that they never touch the food. Kwabana not only is chugging down the water, but they bring over this plate of sandwiches and he starts housing the sandwiches. So he is very much not asserting his power here at all in like that conventional way. Whereas the implication is that Tony Day holds all the cards in this meeting because he's neither eating nor drinking and he kept them waiting.
I saw it a little bit as a power move on Kwabana's part though, too. He's kind of just like smiling.
Like at home here.
Well, no, it's more just completely entertained by the audacity. Like it wasn't even offensive, almost like Harper. He just found it funny. I mean, he's just like
everything
sitting there.
is funny, and he's like, so charming, and how he thinks everything's funny and not serious. But again, he doesn't seem suspicious at all of Tony Day, so I don't know what he's accomplishing by.
No, because he thinks this whole thing is just a fool's errand.
But if
it's
anything,
just kind of like
a power play over Sweet Pea, whose ally he should be.
When Tony says that, he just kind of smiles knowingly, like, sorry, you're not a local buddy, but like, sure, you keep, spewing that BS all day long. He like takes up his phone and just like smiles. Then he starts eating the sandwiches, which to me, I took as a power play on his part.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But so Sweet Pea then says, would you mind fleshing out your plan to migrate users from the payment processor acquisition suite to the new app? Actually, I love more granularity on your local acquisitions because the diversity of them really piqued my interest. Payment processors, text to pay, prepaid cards. What's the unifying principle there? Tony can tell she's fishing. And so he says, what other equity opportunities were you looking at in the region? And the music turns sinister. And she like kind of is like, oh shit. She like doesn't know how to reply. And she like looks over to Kwabana, like, help me. And he's kind of still just eating his sandwiches. Then he like realizes he's like, oh, because he like knows the region, he's able to be quick on his feet and says, Fan Milk, Consumer Goods, MTN. And Tony's like, wow, that's dull. But at least he now is not assuaged because I still don't think he believes them at all.
No, he doesn't believe it for a second. And just so you guys know, Fan Milk is a Ghana-based manufacturer and retailer of ice cream and frozen dairy products established in 1960. It's a subsidiary of Danone and has a significant presence in West Africa. And then MTN is a leading telecommunications provider in Ghana, originally known as Ariba. It was established in 1994 and has since become a significant player in the country's telecom market, approximately 55% of the market share. Cool. And for what it's worth, we know that Tony Day had a failed telecom venture. So that was literally all I could find on either of those companies. If anyone has like anything else that they know, please let us know.
But so Sweet Pea then is like, oh, good, a story I can continue to tell. So she's like, defensive, transparent revenue streams. We don't like risk. Tony just gets up and he's like, great. And then some niceties is like, if you need to see around the city, let me know. And Sweet Pea
I didn't
thanks
think
him.
it was niceties. I actually took it as threatening, at least on the first
Oh,
watch.
you took it as threatening? I just thought he was kind of like, all right, well, this meeting's over, but I'll just like making small talk.
I think he was like, I think the second he looked at Sweet Pea, he was like, I don't trust you guys for 1 second. And they didn't buy their cover story. And then he goes, specifically, he says, great. Well, if you want to tour or transport out of the city, do let me know. There's so much to see. I felt like it was like, if you need help getting out of here, let me know, because you need to get the fuck out of here. That's how I
got it.
That.
Yeah. Well, the Sweet Pea says, you can just call me if you like, if you feel like talking. And then he kind of looks to Sweet Pea and then to Kwabana. And then we go to the next scene. But your read is better, that he's basically saying, get the fuck out of here. Like, cool. Thanks for coming.
Well, and
Adios,
she's
friends.
trying the same kind of ploy, although not using her OnlyFans persona, that she tried with Jonah. Like, if you want to talk, I'm here. It's almost like a motherly thing in a way. Like, if you need to talk.
Oh, I took it more
here.
as a sexual thing.
Well, but but as far as a line to say, it's not something like, if you need to talk isn't a sexual line. I think
no, but kind of like, want to go on a date, like want to get a drink, want to talk.
I didn't take it in a sexual way. I think she was saying it exactly how she meant it, which is, hey, listen, I'm offering you a lifeline just like I offered to Jonah. And I think Tony does not mistake it for anything other than what it is.
Yeah, but I thought it was more like, I'm here, you can talk to me, but also like, doesn't have to just be for talking. So that was how I took it, which was kind of like, this didn't work. So now let me try some other angle. But so now next scene, they're outside the office and Kwabana says, I have a feeling nobody has asked him any questions. And so Sweet Pea tells him that I did a reverse image search and that novelty check pic, it links to an article about Swift GC's acquisition. It's a curious detail about who did it. And Kwabana says, a local investment bank? And Sweet Pea says, no. Swift GC instructed a lawyer. And Kwabana says, is that curious? I assume that happens a lot here. And Sweet Pea's like, well, it depends on the size of the deal in question. So like, this is a $50 million deal. Like, yes, that's curious. So Kwabana makes a face and says, fair point, takes another sip of water. And then Sweet Pea says that she's booked an appointment with this lawyer. And they're coming under the guise of this, it's called like merger market. It's this like database where they basically aggregate all the various M&A deals in one area. Like you can look up like past deals if you're trying to like look up comps and stuff. So this is the company is or database that she's saying they work for. So they then go into this next scene. And I thought that this was kind of an interesting commentary on names. So she says, Mr. Samuels is it? And he says, call me lawyer. And Kwabana and Sweet Pea look confused. He goes, my name is lawyer. It's not uncommon here, although I'm not sure how often that kind of nominative determinism works out. But I did think it's funny because later in the episode, they're constantly making fun of Sweet Pea's name, which for us now, it's just so normal. But
no,
obviously,
it's not normal. It has never been normal.
Sorry, it's not normal, but like I don't stop and think like that is a really weird name when I'm just like Sweet Pea, like whatever. But when we first heard it, we're like, her name is Sweet Pea? Her last name is Go Lightly? Her name is Sweet Pea Go Lightly. I just thought that was funny that his name is lawyer.
He brings up the concept of nominative determinism, meaning what are we supposed to read into someone's name about what their character is? We've had this conversation about all the male characters with unisex names on the show and how we're not really sure what to read into that. I mean, Sweet Pea is used almost in the most ironic way because she looks the part of, we had the reference to the Marilyn in the last episode. She looks the part of the beautiful blonde who's so like sweet and gentle, but like she has this ruthlessness to her that not only does Harper admire, but like she's also got this pornographic content history. And I actually looked up the Sweet Pea name in pop culture and there wasn't anything that I like really found other than it was Popeye's daughter's name in like the Popeye cartoons from the 1930s. And then Sweet Pea was also the name of a 2017 novel where Sweet Pea is the nickname for a serial killer. So it's like, oh, it's ironic, right, that there's the irony of that name. Now, there is her surname, which we haven't talked about, which is Go Lightly, which is, I mean, to me, there's only one reference, which is Breakfast at Tiffany's, right?
Oh, I don't remember it. I saw that, but it was so long ago. What's the reference?
Well, that's the name of Audrey Hepburn's character, right? It's Holly Golightly.
Oh,
and so,
got it.
I mean, I think that there's the dual competing themes there, that this was this 1960s movie supposed to be about female independence in some ways, but like it's in the framework of this woman who is an escort / like sugar baby, right? Like back in the day. So there's this female empowerment, but through like, is there some transactional element to sex, et cetera, et cetera? But I don't know. I haven't really been able to make heads or tails of Sweet Pea's name and what it's supposed to mean, and if there's any determination there, if it's just ironic.
But anyway, Kwabana then says, by example, I was christened Dogfucker Bannerman. He then laughs, but they just look uncomfortable. He is the king of like almost really corny dad jokes.
Yeah, and throughout, by the way, he's supposed to be there as like someone with this local knowledge of how to navigate everything, but he seems to just be like a bull in a china shop.
Yeah. So Sweet Pea then asks, okay, well, how did you define SwiftGC's valuation? The lawyer says SwiftGC is a high growth company. It's not uncommon for comparables to be valued at 10 to 20 times revenue. The mobile pay sector has boomed since the Bank of Ghana relaxed the regulatory environment. And Sweet Pea says, how much other experience do you have in $50 million M&A deals? The lawyer says, I have an accountant and, as I said, an expert valuation advisor I've worked with for 30 years, a regulatory advisor, a tax guy, I could go on. Sweet Pea then says, and how did the fee structure work? Lawyer's just like, excuse me? And she says, how are you paid? He gets incredibly offended, takes off his glasses and says, I've been nothing but polite to you, and that is not a polite question. And how is that relevant to your database? So they basically then get kicked out of this meeting. But what she's trying to hint at is if you're getting paid, call it like 1% of the deal, you have a huge incentive to increase what you think that company is worth. But again, this like $50 million deal, the fact that it was given to a lawyer, not even to a M&A advisor, to a low boutique investment bank. The investment banks are usually the people that are doing these valuation analyses, not lawyers. Lawyers are like drawing up the paperwork. So this is very fair that it's like, this is a little strange.
Well, it's strange to us. And so I think in getting into the next dialogue is important because basically there's this implication that it's otherness, but not wrongness, right? It's just, hey, this is how things work here. You don't know, Sweet Pea. You're this white woman coming from Britain. This is how things are done here all the time. And I mean, I will say I've done real estate transactions in other countries, and on a country by country basis, things can feel wildly different. And you're like, wow, is this how this is done here? Like, this is this office. And it's like, dude, you're reading your own bias. You were expecting this thing that looks like America or looks like Britain. Like, that doesn't make it wrong. It's just different. And I think that there's that common thing. And Kwabana keeps pushing back on that. And Sweet Pea is begging the question, like, wait, no, it just doesn't quite add up. And he's so dismissive of it.
Yeah. And so Kwabana, they get kicked out. Kwabana says, you didn't need to be so rude to him just because he straight batted your questions. And Sweet Pea's like, nothing about that guy or that operation was commensurate with the size of the deal that Tender did with Swiss GC. And Kwabana says, you're telling yourself that to bend the facts to what you want to be true. He said it himself. It's Africa. Just because it's different doesn't make it wrong. And Sweet Pea says, let me put this as delicately as I fucking can. How much do you actually know about Africa? You can stop with this prodigal son gimmick. And Kwabana says, the answer is probably alcohol, meaning like, we're not necessarily seeing eye to eye. If we go and get a drink together, maybe like we can take the temperature down, I guess is probably the best way to put it. So they go to a bar. It's a gorgeous bar on the beach, outside, it's karaoke in the background. And Kwabana says to Sweet Pea, he says, what materially changes in the world if at the bottom of the barrel, these guys are bent and we can prove it? I mean, does the world improve? And this, by the way, is similar to what Eric is saying to Harper later. Sweet Pea says, being as glib as you is actually charmless. You think it's charming, but it's not. I have given this my full fucking attention, and that is a finite resource. And so we've talked about attention a little bit, and so this comes back here. That is why the outcome matters. I mean, yeah, you're probably right. This is probably just a big old fucking distraction and likely a waste of my time. Kwabana says, oh, come on, don't say that. I'm just saying that you should probably tell someone if we're on the verge of eliminating financial fraud in perpetuity and delivering equitable economic outcomes for all. So obviously like dripping with sarcasm.
But it's not just that. For Kwabana, unlike any of our other principal characters, there's more to life than just the job. He sees this total separation between the goals of a trade and the goals of life, the goals of society as a whole, the goal of humanity as a whole, right? He is this grounding force of like, it's not life or death. You can enjoy things. You can enjoy a beer on the beach with a friend. You can enjoy romance. You can have like love and friendship and work and have all these things and keep them separate. And I think he's offering us this glimpse of an outsider to the mentality that everyone else has, where it's like, you can have the job and just have it be a healthy part of your life and not your whole life.
Sweet Pea then says, well, between us, I need the short to work. Before I took Harper's offer, I interviewed with multiple places. I couldn't get a job. You can imagine why. And so this is now like news to us because she seemed to have easily get that job with Mawson Asset Management. But by the way, well, actually, because she went from Petra's fund, then to Mawson Asset Management, but that was because of Harper. And so Harper was willing to look the other way.
I don't think this is a surprise at all based on the initial thing when Harper was interviewing her for the role at Petra's fund.
Mm-hmm. And so Kwabana says, that was a tough thing to happen. Sweet Pea says, keep moving forward. Let the distance grow between me and the event, which by the way, sounds kind of like how people feel about death, where it's like the only thing that heals it is time. She says, let time do its work. When I think of those pink-faced, fat-necked losers laughing at me, and Kwabana laughs and he's like, you have so much disrespect for your audience. You should run a movie studio.
By the way, that line feels almost like meta and self-referential, by the way, like, oh, you should run a movie studio, meaning that like movie executives like have such disdain and like low regard for their
actors.
Viewers. So it's I think it's almost like this self-referential thing of like how the writers do or don't see their audience because they use this incredibly lofty language with all these Shakespearean references and like the, you know, trade lingo and blah, 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 blah. Like, I think that was like a little wink.
Oh, interesting. So Sweet Pea then says, well, the guy who outed me, he got his in a roundabout way. Kwabana looks confused. He's like, roundabout way. And then he realizes it. He says, Rishi, you know it was him? And Sweet Pea says, I think certain things in life make sense. And your stomach is probably right, separating theory from fact. I took this to mean that she doesn't know for sure, but she believes it.
Well, remember, we had thought that maybe she believed that when she reacted that way to Rishi, that it couldn't just be about her thinking he was a murderer, and that it was like so much more than that. So we kind of called that, which is like, yay. But also, Sweet Pea has a track record of never being wrong. Think back to her being the early whistleblower on Pierpoint.
Yeah.
Even like on the day of the White Mischief trade, she was right about the legislation that was coming, the top rate tax cut, and like what that would mean for the market. Like,
interesting.
So I think that we're supposed to interpret that like Sweet Pea's hunches are right. And I think we are given to think now that we have incontrovertible evidence, even though we don't, that Rishi did it. But by the way, and I'm not trying to victim blame here at all, but like she was a very public persona on Instagram when she was first introduced at the beginning of season 3 and simultaneously was creating this content, because when we saw Rishi first looking at it and talking to her about it, she was actively engaged in that. Now, based on what we get subsequently from her, either I was confused in my reading of it that she was still engaged in it, but I don't think so. I think that they changed it a little bit because she goes on to say, I mean, we'll get to it, but she says I was 19. I'm like, the two things are different because you seemed still actively engaged in this in season 3 when you were an analyst on the trading floor and you were not 19. You very much had agency in it, even if it was something you regretted and didn't want shared and you wanted it to be anonymous. Like, so there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance here where I'm totally fine with her having wanted to keep this anonymous, but she's so smart. I think that how could she not have seen that that was going to happen?
Yeah. And so Kwabana asks if her family knows, and she nods. And when he says, what do they make of it? She says, I thought I was close with my mom. She said, I am. But basically her mom never acknowledged that this happened, just wanted to pretend it didn't. And she said that that broke her heart, that she actually had, it's almost like the consequences. She had wanted her mom to acknowledge that this happened. And she just kind of pretended that like, I'm looking the other way and I'm not going to say anything about it.
100%. Harper wanted this acknowledgement from her mom. Sweet Pea wants this acknowledgement from her mom. So there's this like mother-daughter thing that both of them are broken on in different ways. Harper wants acknowledgement of her undeniability and her excellence and that she is so powerful. And Sweet Pea wants acknowledgement that she's a victim and she never gets that. And so I think it's really interesting that Harper's always the one talking about her trauma. And Sweet Pea is never actually playing the victim, but she would punch Rishi in the face if she could, if Rishi hadn't gotten his. And she feels like very vindicated in his downfall. Yeah.
So at this point, some women are signaling to Kwabana they want him to come do karaoke with him. So Kwabana essentially leaves and he's like, make a market on how quickly they will essentially leave me when they hear how bad I am at singing, which by the way, he definitely sings out of key. But so as he leaves, he starts to sing, you know, come on, hold me just like you told me, whatever.
That is the song Steal Away by Robbie Dupree.
Oh.
And the lyrics are basically about a one-night stand between two people who shouldn't be together, stealing away for just one night.
By the way, I did think it was interesting that they had Jim Diker have a one-night stand and then get the woman pregnant, because in this whole conversation about pornography, aside from my like Handmaid's Tale theory, there's no mention of the fact that having sex can lead to a child. And we got so many people who were like annoyed that I was theorizing that there could be the Handmaid's Tale angle because they were like, oh, you should tell Blondie there, what Yasmin did. And I was like, dude, I don't think that's an effective form of birth control, but even effective forms of birth control are not 100% effective. And so the consequences of that action was an actual effing baby. Anyway, so Sweet Pea gets a call from Tony Day. She answers it. And he says, Miss Golightly, you're almost as memorable as your name. Tell me, are you a compulsive liar or was that just a one-off?
And this feels very ominous when Tony is calling Sweet Pea. This feels like a threatening call.
Oh, yeah. We then see her on the beach, looking at the ocean, talking to Tony. He says, why did you lie? I looked you up on the FCA register, and then I called your former employer because she obviously has left Boston Asset Management. Sweet Pea says, a man in your position must know that there is a very vocal minority who believe tender share price is an illusion. I don't know if you were aware of the growing speculation in the press. Tony says, you mean Jim Diker at FinDigest? He telegrammed me. Yeah, he was supposed to come visit us. And Sweet Pea says, after a second of being silent, she says, to get you on the record?
Well, she's silent for a second, and she almost looks like she's going to cry. I thought at this point that she suddenly realizes that she may be in incredible danger because the last person who was supposed to meet with this guy is dead, which is something that she should have realized when she was in the office.
Right. And so Tony says, well, how should I know his intention? He never followed through. Were you in contact with his editor, Mr. Burgess? Diker mentioned that he could sketch out a couple of pathways for me. Would you know about those? Sweet Pea's like, pathways for what? And Tony says,
and by the way, then the second she says it, she seems to regret it almost because it's like, what other pathways could he be talking about?
Right. He says, well, how should I know, Miss Golightly? I never met him. And Sweet Pea says, you know he passed away? Tony says, wasn't aware. Now, do you believe that he didn't know, or is he just saying that? You think he knew? Yeah. He looks like he's about to hang up the phone, but instead he says...
Right, because I think for him, it's like end of conversation. Like, why would you continue the conversation anymore once that question's been asked point blank? I think he knows that something happened to Jim Diker. I don't think he knew he was dead necessarily.
But he says, where are you now? She says, Auntie Frida's in Osu if you don't want to talk on the phone, which I was like, why the fuck are you telling him where you are?
Why are you telling him where you are? Because she thinks he's like looking for a way out.
Right. And he says, it's not a violent city, but the beach can get quite violent at night. And then he hangs up. And she's kind of looking at her phone. And then it zooms out. She's alone on the beach. But you can see that it's now darker. It's like almost like the sun has gone down. It's dusk.
Well, that was such an open threat as far as I was concerned. I am now terrified. And also this scene of Sweet Pea against the ocean. It's beautiful. It's so unlike anything we've seen in industry before. Usually it's like someone being dwarfed by like the London skyline or whatever. It's like Sweet Pea and her convictions against the world, you know?
Yeah. And so the next scene, Sweet Pea's back in the bar. Kwabana's still singing, totally off key. And it's actively dark now. And he's singing, now I close my eyes and I wonder why I don't despise eyes without a face. So this is where we hear, obviously, the title of the episode, Got No Human Grace, Your Eyes Without a Face. The camera then shows a man looking at Sweet Pea semi-menacingly, and she then goes into the bathroom. She's washing her hands, and that same man walks in. And she initially is like, sorry, this is the ladies, I assume, thinking he walked in there by accident. And he just stands there. And she then is like, did you not hear me? It's the fucking ladies. She goes to try to walk out. He grabs her neck. He slams her against the wall, licks her face, and she scratches him. He punches her, and she slams her head against the mirror, literally leaves an indent. She falls to the ground. She stands up, kind of, just been physically assaulted, potentially almost raped. And she gets some like toilet paper. She looks in the mirror. She's all bloodied. She puts some toilet paper in her nose and she then walks out.
But hang on, before she went, like, this is fucking wild, right? Like,
yes,
dude. First of all, the second I saw this man, my assumption was that he'd been hired by Tony Day. And the only question was he hired by Tony Day at Whitney's instruction? And was Tony actually trying to warn her that, like, it's dangerous on the beach, you should get out? Or was it this open threat so that when this man attacked her, she would know who sent him? And, like, there's also this trope of, hey, listen, Eric said it was dangerous for Sweet Pea to go on her own. And now we have this black man in Africa assaulting this white woman, like giving screen time to this terrible racial trope. And he assaults her in like a sexual way. Like, it's one thing to beat her up, but to have it be sexual violence is like a really...
like to lick her face. And,
exactly. Yeah. So I think that that's a really interesting decision that they made to have that be the kind of violence that it is, that it's sexual violence.
Right. But I also was wondering if he didn't necessarily send the guy, but he knew that he was being watched. Like, that's that whole eye without a face.
Right.
Like he was being surveilled.
He was trying to protect her.
Well, he knows he's being watched. I don't know if the person who's watching him knows. It's like the friends. Does he know that they know that they know? But the question is, is he actively a participant in this surveilling that is going on? Or it's like he knows that he's being watched, so he's like, you got to be careful what you do. But then he actively outs her by having her say, so he's still responsible, regardless of whether he sent the person or not.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know that he sent the person, but I think he knew that if she said where she was, he knew that someone would go for her.
That somebody would be sent.
Exactly. Anyway, she goes out. He's like, your eyes without a face. He then sings like face, face. Again, totally off key. Sees Sweet Pea, face busted, tissues coming out of her nose, throws over the microphone. She's like, oh shit. And so from here, this is where we then have them sitting. But now they're at the swanky hotel. And again, the only thing that cued me that they weren't sitting at the bar again is the fact that now they're ordering martinis. And so Kwabana says, do you think you were targeted? Sweet Pea says, well, Tony Day called me before it, so you fucking tell me, assuming like, yes. And so the waiter brings them both the martini. And in the
so actually, it's funny. I already knew they were at the hotel bar because the martinis don't happen until now, right? And it made sense to me that they went back to the hotel because it's like, dude, this woman's covered in blood. Like, you got to get her home. You got to get her safe, like whatever. But the second the martinis show up, I was like, oh no. Listen, if I were assaulted in a bar, let alone like here, let alone in a foreign country, I would be freaking out. And I mean, listen, my college roommate got spit on by a homeless man in the subway. And I mean, went basically one step short of like calling the head of the CDC. Okay. She went to like an emergency room, had like 10 different doctors or whatever. You would be freaked the F out. To then start drinking martinis in the lobby of your hotel with your extremely attractive coworker is like red flag, like don't do it, don't do it. So immediately like my red flags were up at this point. This is not a normal trauma response.
Yeah, well, again, what cued me to it, actually, it wasn't even that. It was the voice in the background that said, let's drink some beer and make some bad choices. And then they get martinis. So that's what cued it for me. Mm-hmm. But so Sweet Pea then looks at him and says, can you stop fucking around and just admit you've seen my tits? And so Kwabana, because she's talking back to the whole siren leak.
Right.
And Kwabana looks at her and he's like, fine, yes, I saw it. She asked, did you like it? And Kwabana's like, what are we doing? And she continues to ask, like, did you like it? And he's like, I don't know what the right answer is. And she says, honesty. It's honesty. And Kwabana says, I mean, I did not like it. And he's then kind of taking a sip of his drink. Sweet Pea says, is Harper a good fuck? And he says, why? Because crazy girls are good in bed. Sweet Pea says, I think that's reductive, misogynistic, and often true. And Kwabana says, I agree. I'm just projecting what you think. And again, I don't know why they had that whole thing in there. I don't know if she was trying to fish to understand, like, if they're more than casual.
I think that's a good read. I think it's just really interesting that she is sexualizing herself to this man who has been nothing but her friend and treated her respectfully, even though he has like joked around and like not really taken this whole little quest very seriously. I feel like she is tempting him the same way that Yaz tempted Robert in the final episodes of the last season.
And actually, someone commented on our YouTube video that they were surprised that we didn't pick up on the fact that Yasmin likely was testing Henry with Haley. Mm-hmm. That it was almost like the reason that she dropped the smile as soon as like they started hooking up is that was a test and he failed it.
Yeah, I don't know that I buy that though. I think that's a great possible interpretation, but she wants to continue the relationship with Haley. And she wanted to have another go, and Henry was the one who shot it down the next day. I didn't read it that way, but it's certainly possible. Yeah. I think that Robert was always having none of, like, Yasmin, whenever she was wounded, would lash out at him and try to seduce him because that was her way of regaining power. And Robert was having none of it. I wonder to what extent Sweet Pea is repeating that same trope of like, I'm a wounded animal. I want to suddenly feel better, and sexualizing herself through this conversation. Because I think that whenever people start talking about sex, even if it's like your other relationships, all of a sudden now it's top of mind. Right. And I think it brings this like flirty tone to the conversation.
Right. And it's like, who's the one who is starting this whole thing? Kind of even back with like Haley in the very beginning, Haley with the whole situation. And now here, this encounter, like who was the one who kind of made it about sex?
And it's 100% Sweet Pea.
Yeah.
Kwabana is so reluctantly being drawn into this.
Yeah. I mean, he literally because Sweet Pea says, did you like get off to my siren videos? And he literally, his reaction is like, what the fuck? And she then says, are you a porn addict? And he is like, well, I basically like, yes, like I watch it. Like what guy doesn't?
Well, I think it's important to read his line. He says, like most men who grew up with the internet, I mean, I can see whoever, do whatever, to whoever, whenever. This is the same conversation that Rishi and Jim Diker were having. So this is almost like the parallel, the bizarro universe version of the both Jim Diker and his co-parent conversation from the beginning, the first 37 seconds of the previous episode, and the Rishi Jim Diker conversation about like the ubiquitousness of pornography and what it has done to male-female relationships. And I think it's crazy, by the way, from like another third level layer, that the conversation of seduction, right? The mode of seduction is he has seen this video of Sweet Pea. She is using the conversation about this video to seduce him when he has already seen her doing that. Like, it's so wild that this is like what seduction and courtship now looks like.
Yeah. And so Kwabana says, Sweet Pea, you chose to put it online. And she says, I was fucking 19. It's money. And then he asks her, do you watch porn? And she says, like a lot of women who grew up on the internet, yeah.
But also, again, this note about her being 19, we know she came from a poor background. It frames it as like, I was stripping to pay my way through college. I was doing OnlyFans when I was 19 years old. To me, there's either an inconsistency here or she's not being honest with herself. That she was like, I did this when I was 19. It was for one purpose, and I wanted to leave it behind me when I became the successful person on Wall Street. But I just don't know which is true.
Right. Kwabana then says, what do you make of the bird that got tag teamed by 1,000 youths in shisties? By the way, it's funny because after last episode, we both were like, we still don't know 100% what the meaning of this thing is. This is
no, I knew what that was. That was the first conversation we had.
Yeah, but you were like, after watching this a bunch of times, still not 100% sure. I still was like, okay, but what's the 1,000 youths? We were like, we know what the Maryland is.
That was very much the Bonnie Blue video.
Yeah, no. We had that conversation. But the fact that they titled that last episode 1,000 youths, they never used the term youths. And even you were like, I've never really heard that term before. They decided to use that term specifically in this episode, not the episode that actually carried that title. That's the whole thing, is that it literally clarifies the last episode title, that it was tied to that 1,000 men, like, again, having sex with Bonnie Blue. Because to me, even though, yes, we heard 1,000 men, it still didn't tie the youths thing to me. It was this that then made that connection clear. So that's the whole thing. So it's almost like you left last episode, what the fuck just happened? You literally say, even after watching this episode 3 times, not entirely sure, I know what the Maryland thing is. Now in this episode, it's like, okay, 1,000, like that's 100% what that was in reference to. It was the porn. I mean, and yes, we knew that, but it's like, this is 100% almost like certainty that this is what that meant.
Oh, see, I took it the exact opposite way. I took this as the explanation of this episode's title, because 1,000 youths in shisties. Shisties is British slang for balaclavas, where you are obscuring every part of your face except for your eyes. And that's what the men in the Bonnie Blue video. So these are the eyes without a face. The 1,000 youths are the eyes without a face, who are both like the voyeuristic consumer of porn. Well, and also Sweet Pea is our Marilyn. It's not Diana.
Oh, I didn't get that. Okay. That's an interesting point.
I think that it's Sweet Pea. Diana wasn't blonde until that very last episode. Like, she was Diana, like Princess Di, whereas Sweet Pea is our very visually cued blonde.
Yeah.
So I took this to be not as a clarification on the title of the last episode, but more as like, this is another riff on it.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that they're clarifying in this episode a number of things that were maybe left a little bit hanging last episode. Sweet Pea then says, yeah, more power to you. And Kwabana's like, come on, you don't believe that shit. And Sweet Pea says, stop fucking pathologizing. Fuck Freud. There doesn't have to always be a why.
But also, there doesn't have to always be a why is so antithetical to what Sweet Pea has been chasing down the why with Tender. Like there's no tomorrow. So I don't actually believe that she believes what she's saying right now.
Right. And Sweet Pea says, good for the body. And then she says, what do you like? Kwabana laughs and he's almost like uncomfortable. He's like, no one's getting that question answered, honestly. Like, no. And Sweet Pea repeats herself and she says, what do you like? And Kwabana says, okay, you made me say this. And she shrugs and she kind of has this almost like coy, innocent, like takes a sip of her martini. And he says, fuck, I feel like such a traitor. Forgive me, Dr. Umar. I like premium calcium, small blonde white women. Yes, I know I'm a cliche. Look, sue me. But I also like to be held. And she then says, you're so corny, but I guess some things are only attractive because you can't have them. But going back to, as you said, that conversation with Harper in the very beginning.
Well, we've taken this journey through Ghana where we've totally upended all, I think, very deliberately by showing how beautiful Ghana is, by showing that there's really like, okay, there's something beneath the surface here. It's kind of, but like, whatever. We upended the whole thing of Eric being like, oh no, white woman going alone to Africa. Like, no, it's beautiful. It's great. Like all this stuff. And then it's like, oh, no. Now Sweet Pea's been attacked. And now we're taking that old, terrible racial stereotype that, you know, there's this fetishization going on and having it play out. It's like we're having all the worst beliefs and suspicions be legitimized. So I think that's like a very complex journey that the writers have taken us on. I'm actually rooting for there not to be anything with Tender. I'm rooting for Ghana to be this safe place. I'm rooting for like Kwabana and Sweet Pea to have this platonic work relationship where they're razzing each other and they can be sarcastic and it's cute, but it's not sexual. And it's like, no, why are you doing this to me? Like, why are you taking all of the things that like we held to be these lofty things and bringing them down to these like the worst things we think?
Well, that was how I felt last season with Eric. And also even this season with Eric, when it's like, so far, it's been pretty good. He didn't take the freaking bait with the hotel girl. Anyway, so we then go to the next scene where they go to their hotel room together and he says he'll be next door. And she's like, no, shut the door. And then they sleep together.
Well, remember back to again, Harper and Robert on their road trip, everyone always has side-by-side rooms. And the joke was that they were like religious or whatever, which they obviously weren't in the last thing. And it's like Kwabana could make the Robert choice here and he doesn't. Yep. And I'm actually like so sad seeing this play out because I wanted for them to rise above this implication.
I do think that like Harper, she was obviously super preoccupied with like just finding out that she lost her mom. She's obviously told Eric, but she hasn't told Kwabana, who again, we still don't know how like exclusive they are.
But there was that like petulant, okay, maybe I'll go with her thing. And I don't know to what extent this is him being like taking revenge for her liquidating his positions.
That's what I thought.
You want to make it all about the work? Fine. You hurt me when like it was all about the work. And now I'll hurt you. I don't know to what extent he like actively thought that, but it sucks.
And also we don't know how serious they are. Like we don't know what happened since that last episode. Like things were not necessarily left great, that she gave him a job. Like she marched out of that restaurant.
Harper, that's the biggest sign of love is giving someone a job. That's love in Harper's mind. And I also think it's really crazy that Sweet Pea is talking about wanting distance from this version of herself that was this pornographic object. And now instead she is like, let's talk about you watching my video and how you felt. And now let's act it out. Like that's her falling back into like her lowest point.
Yeah. And then from here we go to the next scene, which is Eric in his robe scrolling and looking at pictures of Sweet Pea's boobs and like looking at all this stuff too, which got me so upset. Cause again, it's like, that's what I was saying all the way up to this point, he had felt like this father hen, like all this stuff. And then it's like, he's looking at the photos.
Yeah.
Like, don't look at the photos.
So like in Eric's defense, like I don't think Eric has gone and sought out this content. It's an email from someone called Daniel Miller. The subject line is forward, City Tart in all caps. And it's Sweet Pea's headshot at the top with her title, Research Analyst at Mostyn Asset Management. So I don't know to what extent Eric knew when he and Harper hired Sweet Pea about Sweet Pea's background. So sorry, go ahead.
It reminds me of the forward he got from Adler with the pictures
Yasmin.
of Charles's like decomposing body, that it was like, this is a problem for us. And it's almost like, just so you know, here's this woman who you've hired and like, this is what's out there about her. That's a really interesting point.
I don't think it was,
got
again,
it. Okay.
It's still this prurient gaze that he has on these photos, right? We can't tell, to be fair. We assume that it is. There could also be this like fatherly thing of like, oh no, poor Sweet Pea, this is out there. We haven't seen enough of Eric and Sweet Pea to know how he's taking this. But I do think it goes back to what happened to Eric with his daughters. That these quasi-pornographic photos that his daughters took and circulated, or rather one daughter, of this other 14-year-old girl are out there ruining her life. And now he's the one looking at the photos that were forwarded to him of Sweet Pea. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to continue perpetuating this cycle? Are you going to hit delete? Are you going to go to Sweet Pea and be like, are you okay? Did you know this? You know, like, so I think that it's like the cycle continues. And as much as you might want to break it, it's just keeps going on as we get older.
Okay. I missed that was forwarded. So that actually gives me a little comfort that maybe this was like not necessarily done from this terrible place, because I feel like there isn't a shift where he makes a bad decision until later. And so in that vein, I'm hoping that, okay, maybe he's still kind of in this, like, I'm going to say good Eric, but like not disgusting Eric place. So the door then opens and Harper walks in and Eric says, oh shit, didn't know you were here already. Any update from Accra? And Harper says that Kwabana didn't sound optimistic. Now he didn't the whole time, so that's not really like anything changed. And then they both went dark. And she says, I feel like we're running out of time, but I have an idea. And she says, source margin from another prime broker. Eric says, well, we can't do that in our precarious state. Harper says, but what if we don't tell them about our state? Our financials, our exposure. We just tell them we fell out with our prime broker. They miss out on a buzzy fund, whatever it takes to get some fast cash. Eric says they'll ask for documents. And Harper says, well, we'll give them documents that read the way they wish them to. And then Eric says, bogus financials, by the way, parallels what Tender's doing. I think like the fact that she's willing to go this mile is like, you're no better than these other people. But Eric continues, what happens if Tender's stock continues to defy gravity? Then we're double leveraged. Then what? We get 2 margin calls and open another Azat's line, throw in a third for shits and giggles. That's not losing the house. That's fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Like,
this is so fucking illegal on like 20 different fronts. And this is exactly what Archegos did. So Archegos opened up an account with one prime broker to trade total return swaps on a handful of equity names. So it was Viacom, Tencent, CBS, and Discovery, where they were actually long the names, not short. And basically a total return swap is a derivatives contract where you don't actually go out and like borrow a bunch of money and then buy the physical shares of the stock. It's more like an interest rate swap where you agree on the notionals. Let's say it's like 100 million, right? You post initial margin, let's say like 10 or $20 million or whatever. So you're levered 5 or 10 to 1. You then pay some funding rate like SOFR plus a spread. And in return, you either get paid or you pay the delta on the stock price. So if the stock goes up 10% and you're long, you get 10 million. If you're long and the stock goes down 10%, you owe the dealer 10 million. Now, these are derivatives. So the bank is the one that owns the shares in this case, not the hedge fund. So there's no public disclosure requirements for you. No one knows that you're long and you can get a shit ton of leverage. So Archegos ran around to all these different prime brokers like Goldman, UBS, Stanley, Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley, everyone, right? And they didn't tell them, or they actively lied to them about how much leverage they had with other prime brokers. So no one knew how big their exposure truly was. So what happened was, I think in 2021, Viacom issued a bunch of new shares and the stock price went down. So it triggered margin calls across the street on all these derivatives positions that Archegos couldn't meet. So Stanley and Goldman stopped out really early, but the banks that didn't stop out got totally crushed. And I think Credit Suisse was the biggest loser. And I think they lost a total of $5.5 billion on that. And it also triggered a bunch of reforms about what you have to disclose to your prime brokers. So that's what Harper's suggesting they do here, is a repeat of Archegos. Like, this is very much grounded in reality. And like, you cannot do this, Harper.
I mean, it's funny though, because she's always been this person that's like, I will do things that are totally illegal. And other people have to keep her in line. Eric, he's like, why am I going to prison for this terrible idea? By the way, it's his money that he's now out $10 million right now. So if anyone was like going to have skin in the game to be like, let's do something, like, she's not actually, I mean, it's her reputation and it's like whatever, but like, she's not actually on the hook for any hard physical dollars. He is. And he's still like, dude, what the fuck? Like, you can't do that.
No.
I mean, yeah. So this again, like, kind of totally is in line with like who we kind of know she can be, given what happened in season 1 with the wrong way trade episode. Like, they kind of established this very early, but she's like, well, they're not holding themselves to any ethical standard. Why should we? And it's like, well, because I mean, you should probably not try to go to jail. Like,
also, they're not holding themselves to any ethical standard. We know that they like, okay, yes, they did something wrong with the journalist. And yes, again, our legal
they might have murdered the journalist, you know.
But she doesn't know that. Like, it's not clear to me that everyone suspects them of murder here. So we, the viewer, know that Whitney has no ethics, but Harper does not.
Right.
So,
yeah.
Okay, we got Jeffrey and Sunderland. Like, okay, by the way, the article that they shot down with the Jim Diker, shot down meaning like they stopped from running, was totally unethical because Harper was in fact asking him to cross ethical lines. And by the way, she doesn't seem suspicious about his death. Like, if anything, I'd be like, something's going on. Like, we're not pointing to any of the actual nefarious stuff. And now all she's gotten is a call from Kwabana or messages from Kwabana being like, not much here. So what ethical lines does she know that they're crossed? I just, like, there's this constant disconnect that we keep pointing out between what we as the viewer know because we've been given this insight that Harper simply doesn't have.
Right. And so Eric says, why would we invite potential prosecution when nothing has materially changed on what we can prove on tender? It's brainless. And yes, 100%. And so Harper says, we're going to lose the war because they're willing to fight dirty and we're not. And Eric says, Harper, the thing is lost. As your co-partner, my position is that we liquidate our tender position and find the least painful way of boarding this whole thing up. Now, back in Accra, Sweet Pea and Kwabana are at breakfast. And he hands her what I assume is Tylenol. So unclear if he's giving it to her because like she's hungover. It's probably more because like she's got her face bashed in, but she's, you know.
She gives him a look and.
Right. And he says, they're for your face.
Well, there's that. We did see their sexual encounter being like not the tamest thing in the world. I do think there's also this implication that maybe there was like a roughness to it. And there's that undercurrent.
Oh, I didn't get that, but okay. Yeah.
I don't know. But I think there's like what's this for? Because is it, you thought I was so drunk and hungover that I wasn't in control of my faculties? I don't think she's like, oh, is this for my face? Like she knows her face looks like shit, right? So what else would it be for is the only thing I could think of.
Right. So she says, let's just forget this ever happened. And Kwabana says, what happened? Sweet Pea says, I was fucked up. And Kwabana says, so you do always need a why. Going back to like, that's why she slept with him. But he says, okay, look, I'll be the first to admit I didn't come here with a whole bunch of belief that this would solve our trades problem. But while you were sleeping, I did a little more digging. And apparently, Tender acquired Swift GC from Gold Salt Media, a tiny subsidiary in a suite of companies owned by a media conglomerate. Sweet Pea says, I knew that. And Kwabana says, okay, well, Gold Salt Media's chairman recently died, and his scions are jockeying to cut up his financial corpse, Murdoch and Kenty, which Succession, like this is totally, you know. And Kwabana says, well, the British sought to civilize the Gold Coast. They didn't think enslavement was enough to bring us closer to God. They also saw fit to import buggery and emotional retardation. Sweet Pea's like, I'm sorry, what? And Kwabana says, boarding school. So he then goes on to say that his auntie, who's not really my auntie, but you know, she went to Akimoto with a certain Mrs. Mensah. Now, Mrs. Mensah is mourning her father's death. And her father just so happens to be the chairman of Gold Salt Media Group. Yes. And then he says, Ghana's very small at the top.
I'll say, so I feel like the whole implication of Kwabana coming on this trip in the first place was like, you are a local. You know where all the bodies are buried in Ghana. You should have special access. And the whole time he's been like, well, I don't know, guess there's nothing here. If Ghana's so small at the top, why aren't you leveraging this from the beginning? He clearly didn't care and didn't want to do the work. And I do wonder if what's coming about is actually that he was maybe subconsciously not trying to subvert Harper's trade, like not trying to sabotage it, but he was like, why should I lift a finger to help this trade? I'm here, like whatever. That he's kind of pouting and being this child. But now he wants it to work for Sweet Pea because I do think, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's like she's been the one chasing this down. And I think he is like, you know what? Like, I need to do right by her, not do right by Harper.
Interesting. I didn't get that, but I like that. I like that take.
I don't know.
So yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. So next we see Sweet Pea and Kwabana in this meeting with Ms. Mensah, and Sweet Pea asks to understand a little better about the Swift GC connection. And so Ms. Mensah says that there's now 8 of them fighting over this legacy, says not big enough to warrant a dispute. And Sweet Pea's like, not big enough. Swift GC was quite a chunky deal. Ms. Mensah's like, yeah, it's more real estate dispute. You know, the land the office is on.
But by the way, the land the office is on, it's a P.O. box as far as we can tell.
Right. Sweet Pea says, the tender paid $50 million for Swift GC, right? And Miss Mensah just starts to like laugh. She like loses it. And she's like, what? If we had $50 million, this would be a total bloodbath. Meaning like they're currently fighting over like some stupid real estate transaction. But like if there was $50 million, they'd be fighting a whole lot more. And Sweet Pea, she goes to her phone. She shows them the picture of the novelty check. She's like, but it said $50 million here, does it not? And Miss Mentz is just like, dude, you can write any nonsense you want on those things. It doesn't mean it's true. And then she's just sort of like laughing. She's like, $50 million for a tiny company? Lord have mercy. And so Sweet Pea's like, okay, well, can we actually see the business? It's only listed as a P.O. box online. So we then go to this dilapidated building on, again, a big piece of land, but they have to open a chain link fence. They like go in, they see a whole bunch of panels that like list the businesses that are in this, I guess, real estate development. And there's so much dust on it. Like clearly like nobody's really been there. So they, whatever, wipe it off. And they whisper 5th floor. And Sweet Pea's like, why are we whispering? So that was why that's where I thought of like the eyes without a face thing and like the like being tracked, that they're like trying to be quiet because like someone's watching them, you know?
I thought it was more like they're going around and they're kind of playing detective, but they haven't really uncovered anything yet. And here they are, and they're like playing detective and they feel silly. But like, I like your idea that they're trying to subvert surveillance.
But they like don't know that they need to. But again, it's like back to that gut hunch thing where they talk about like the gut being right. And Sweet Pea does seem to have, for the most part, a good gut. So like, why are we whispering? So anyway, they look at each other, they open the door, and it's like an abandoned room. They walk in, I guess they go up to the 5th floor, and there's a guy in what looks like a security guard outfit. And he just goes like, who are you? And Sweet Pea goes, do you know of Tender? The guy goes, Tender? And he says to some other guy who's also in a security guard suit. He's like, Tender. And Sweet Pea says, who hired you? Swifty C or Tender? Why are you here? The man says, squatters. And so Sweet Pea then picks up the phone to dial the main line. And as she dials, the phone rings on the dude's desk. He just picks it up. He hangs it up. And Kwabana says, what are we looking at? Sweet Pea says, a facade. So what they're basically discovering was there was no $50 million acquisition. And they basically paid on paper $50 million, but they bought an empty room. There's nothing there. This whole thing, it's a illusion, right? Smoke on mirrors, if you will. Go to the gym commentary. So from here, we then go back to Stern Tao, and Harper and Eric are outside on the balcony. They're smoking, and they're kind of just like figuring out, how are we going to close down this whole firm? So Eric says, say we prove Tender isn't what we say it is. We get the surrogate joy of saying, your identity is bullshit. You're a fake. And then what? We get temporarily to live in the illusion that we ourselves are built on firmer ground. Basically, like we are, able to have the Schadenfreude, or what was that? The hypocrisy that like you guys are bad, but we're not bad. And Harper says, well, crucially, we're not lying to the world to profit off it, even though 5 minutes ago, that's exactly what you wanted to do.
Correct.
Eric says, that feels much closer to the truth of my life than anything else I've said to myself. That I did not understand. Did you understand that line?
Well, I think it's, hey, listen, that Eric has failed colossally and come to grips with the fact that he like is not a successful father, right? And so he's been lying to himself about all these things he is, right? That he like is this father, that he could be this, that he could be that. It's saying for once, like, hey, I am not lying to the world. Like that, basically coming out and having the fruits of your labor and being able to like put that next to your name would finally give him like truth and meaning that he's been looking for, that he hasn't gotten through the celestial way he's supposed to feel about his kids.
Yeah. So Harper then takes a drag of her cigarette, and as they do this, the phone rings, and she goes in, she puts it on speakerphone, and it's Sweet Pea. And Sweet Pea says, the thing is nothing. Harper asks her to explain. And so she says, Diker's payment laundry thesis suggested that Tender's high-frequency acquisitions were to circumvent the local decency and gambling laws. But what if something else was motivating their indiscriminate spending? Let's say you claim to be a fast-growing, high-revenue-generating company, but that's only a claim. Fake profits leads to fake cash. So what do? You have to deploy fake cash. Why? Because cash reserves are the first thing that an auditor looks for. But how do you account for the cash balance not being there? You say, oh, I've already spent it. But Tender is lying with the value of what they're buying out here because juicing up fuels the facade of aggressive growth. And then they deploy said fake cash. Kwabana says it's a Potemkin village. Sweet Pea says they paid $50 million for an empty room. Why? Because they didn't. SwiftGC has no users, there's no revenue, and there's no $50 million. That's what their book says, but it's cosmetic. They probably spent 3 cents on the dollar, if that. And then they knocked it back with bribes at the local level to make it look like many multiples more. Photo ops, novelty checks, it's all surface. Harper says, the cash can never sit still. It doesn't need to be real if it's all hot footing from one acquisition to the next. Always too short of a say to be seen. They can always point to its next destination. Kwabana says, correct. The opaque structures, the complex web of subsidiaries, the Africa of it all. They're probably so brazen they think that people are too lazy to do the footwork to actually knock on the door. Sweet Pea says, well, guess what? I knocked on the fucking door, bitch. Each stage of Tender's pre-pivot is all overinflated. Each lie relies on the next. Fake users drives fake revenue, which drives fake cash, which then must be deployed on acquisitions, which accounts for more fake users and more fake revenues. Kwabana says it's an Ouroboros, which I thought was so interesting because it's basically like that snake eating its tail, which is literally what I had said about the fact that like they were getting this investment from PeerPoint and then they were using that investment to then go buy PeerPoint. And I was like, it's like, I literally said the same thing. And by the way, we had not seen this yet. So I thought that was so funny that they're saying this now about the acquisition stuff. Sweet Pea says, whatever the fuck it is, it's a feedback loop of fakery. That is why their profits never suffered after the US gambling legislation came in and why Whitney could call siren without a second thought about the bottom line. Harper says Tender started as a payment processor, and Sweet Pea says, and it became a bank to hide the fact that it was never a successful payment processor. It was a phantom. Eric says again, the thing was nothing. And then they ask about the photos, and we'll get into the next thing. But I want to make sure that people understand what's happening here, because if they're making up fake revenue numbers and all that, it's then flowing into net income. Net income flows into cash. So if they're making this revenue stuff up, it should be basically coming into the cash account. When the auditors come and they look, there has to be cash there. And so the only way that they can like essentially account for the fact that there's no cash is to say, hey, we spent it. The problem is then those huge acquisitions then in theory should be driving more users, which then drive more revenue, which then should trickle down. And then they have to do this whole thing again.
So can I just ask a really dumb question just to hammer this point home and make sure I fully understand? The whole Sunderland smoking gun was this guy was allegedly getting clumps of payments through their payment processors in Africa and then putting them into these pie charts to go into the earnings reports or whatever. And the whole issue that we thought was so illegal was that they weren't accurately reporting them. But this was made up money that never, so the whole thing, back to our original thing from our legal expert friends in the fintech world who are saying that is such an illegal thing that would be a smoking gun. In fact, is not the smoking gun because there never was any money because they were not laundering money because there was no money. So the question is then is, okay, if there was never any money here, and again, this is why after watching this episode, I was like, it's Wirecard, we're done, because the whole thing with Wirecard was there was $2 billion allegedly in the Philippines that was never there. So just to be clear, Wirecard committed fraud by systematically inventing profits in cash and then maintaining the illusion through a series of fake counterparties. They used forged documents. So like, I mean, truly just like straight up crimes. And at the heart of the scheme was basically this claim that a significant portion of their business came from third-party payment processors in regions where it supposedly could not operate directly, such as parts of Asia and the Middle East. Wirecard reported that these partners generated substantial revenues and profits, and that the resulting cash was held in escrow or trust accounts at foreign banks. In reality, many of these partners either barely existed or conducted little to no real business. The transactions had never occurred, and the profits were simply fabricated entries designed to inflate Wirecard's earnings. To support these false profits, Wirecard also fabricated cash balances, ultimately claiming that 1.9 billion euros sat in trust accounts in the Philippines. This cash did not exist. The company produced forged bank confirmations and trustee letters to substantiate the balances, and auditors relied heavily on documentation routed through intermediaries rather than independently verifying the accounts directly with the banks themselves. This failure of basic audit controls allowed the fraud to persist for years and is now regarded as one of the most severe audit breakdowns in modern corporate history. Alongside the accounting manipulation, we have all of the work that they did to suppress scrutiny of those journalists, right? But they also had the regulator stepping in on their behalf because the regulator, 80% of people at the regulator were long Wirecard stock. And so this scheme, like from this article I read, this scheme was not the work of rogue employees. It was top down, involving senior leadership, including CEO Marcus Braun and COO Jan Marsalek, who is now a fugitive. The fraud finally collapsed in June 2020 when auditors weren't able to confirm the existence of the 1.9 billion euros in cash, leading Wirecard to admit the money was missing and file for insolvency days later. So that's what actually went down with Wirecard.
Damn. I will say one thing. It's funny because Jen and I, like we keep saying, we have not watched ahead I do think some people in the financial press have. And so you were saying you were almost a little bit annoyed.
All critics
that you were
have watched
annoyed
the whole season so they can watch the
Yeah.
so they can write the most informed critiques.
Right. But so that's why you were almost annoyed that you had read the Wirecard thing and you would put it in there, but you were like, again, we don't know for sure. But you were like, I'm a little annoyed if this is because they had that advanced look. But regardless, I mean, we don't know for sure. We also don't know exactly how the story plays out. And there's also
but now we
more
know.
of the
Now we know
interpersonal,
because
I
now
guess
the threatening the journalist,
Yeah.
like there's no two ways about this. This is in fact our confirmation that like all the other names that I had thrown out there when I was initially doing my digging of like Revolut, like I don't think Revolut is like trying to hurt journalists and freaking whatever. So the point though is that the first 4 episodes of building up this case against Tender were all for naught because they weren't actually doing the things that we were trying to track down. We were like, what were they doing?
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. The whole Africa of it all from Kwabana is that this whole thing was a red herring because we all thought it was going to be like money laundering, blah, blah, blah. These things are illegal and it's being washed to these countries. No. There just was never any money.
Yeah.
And back to your previous observation about Jonah's phrasing of how Whitney was watching the stock price like an EKG, right? It's okay. Like this company is just a fictional house of cards. So it's how much does the market believe this lie? And no wonder, because by the way, like, is it somebody's figured this out? Like that's what he needs to be watching like a hawk, because you disagree?
No, I agree 100%. I'm just trying to think, does Jonah know / is Jonah in on the whole freaking gig? And like, again, are they bringing in?
I think he knew because he kept being like, you're doing all this stuff in Africa. And Whitney
that's
was
true.
like, what are you doing? And Whitney's like, we're expanding. And remember when Jim Diker said to Henry Muck, what is it that Tender actually does? And Henry was like, what do you mean? What do we do?
Henry doesn't know. Yeah.
I felt like there was this moment where like Henry doesn't actually know what they do. And Whitney is like, we are just a highly expansionary word salad nonsense. He basically was like, we're this rapidly growing company that's expanding through acquisition.
How does the CEO not know about any of this stuff?
Because he was high and incompetent. And the funny thing is I think that it was like the whole point is that they needed to go out and build enough credibility to basically trick a bank into joining with them so they could become a bank. And the whole thing was like, Jonah is probably too smart to have fallen for this for much longer. So Whitney had to oust him and install someone who's even less competent and more of a mental head case. So he could, I mean, there's no way that Henry Muck knows what's going on because he's just the useful idiot.
Right. And that's interesting going back to last season, useful idiot. But
I do useful idiot.
Yeah. I mean, I actually wonder if Whitney would have had no problems fucking over Jonah, or if maybe he did love him. And so he basically like kicked him out to like save him.
Good. Maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know.
But clearly he's trying to.
I like that read that maybe, but if anything, there is the whole thing that you pointed out last episode of Jonah still owns a bunch in this company. It cuts both ways though, right? Like if you really loved him, you'd probably cut him loose because the company.
Well, not necessarily because he has financial ties. But I mean, like if you take the equity away, it's basically going to zero. You know what I mean? Like,
that's
so
what
it's
I'm saying.
kind of all the same.
Yeah.
But yeah. I do think that part of it was a motivation to kind of keep him his incentives on the right.
I completely agree because you
will.
can only sue people and you can only take them down so much if your incentives are aligned. Now,
exactly.
Back to where we were last time, Jonah's incentive that he is indicating that he doesn't really care, but like who knows?
Yeah. So we now know that again, this is a giant nothing. Again, I like the Potemkin village, right? And Eric,
if you guys don't know
says,
the reference, by the way, a Potemkin village is a reference to like a fake city that's built for show. This was done in history by corrupt governments to convince like neutral third-party observers that you aren't like committing human rights violations.
Right. Yep. And so Harper then asks, did you get photos of Swift GC? Kwabana says, yes, we did. And Sweet Pea says, and Diker's source is here and we can make him the mother lode. Eric asks if he wants to whistleblow, and Sweet Pea says he wants some pathways to understanding what that might look like. Harper says, unfucking believable work. And Sweet Pea says, yes, I quite agree. Eric says to keep them up to date. And when they hang up, you just have a quick scene of Sweet Pea and Kwabana, like basically hugging, so excited, clapping, and they're just like on cloud 9. Now, we then go back to the Stern Tao office, and Harper asks Eric, like, how do we present this? How fast and wide can we disseminate this? Eric says, we still don't have the irrefutable evidence. We need the informer. And Harper says, we don't need the world to believe us, just investors with enough capital. What if I go to Pierre's conference and instead of talking about women in finance, I talk about something else entirely? We don't need proof. Eric asks why, and Harper says, because we finally have a compelling story to tell. But I still think, back to the very beginning of the episode, she could have done that from the very beginning.
Yes, with the Sunderland thing, although it would have been the wrong thing.
Yeah. All right. So from here, we're then back in Accra. And Kwabana and Sweet Pea, they're driving back to, I assume, the hotel. And Sweet Pea calls Burgess at FinDigest. She introduces herself. She says, hi, I'm Sweet Pea Golightly. He goes, you're what now? Because this just keeps being a nod to the fact that like her name is funny, which we haven't had, by the way, since the very first episode. And I do think it's partly because of like the guy who's like, my name is Lawyer. Like that's common. So it's sort of being like, you think that's weird as a random outsider? Like let's take a look at Sweet Pea and her name, which is like equally as bizarre and also not uncommon now in the US. Like the uncommon thing these days is to have a kid with a quote unquote like traditional name. But anyway, she then says to Burgess, I'm very sorry for the loss of your colleague. I work for an investigative hedge fund called Stern Tao. Burgess, by the way, is outside walking his dog.
His giant Great Dane.
Yeah. He says, I've heard of you, unfortunately. And Sweet Pea says, I've opened a potential line of communication with Jim Diker's source here in Accra, who he had planned to meet. Burgess says, yeah, before Thunder muzzled us. Sweet Pea says, are there any protections you can offer him as a public body? And Burgess says, I mean, there was a whistleblower directive, but we're not covered by that anymore because Doombrain mugs falsely incentivized other Doombrain mugs to vote us out of Europe. Now, I didn't understand what he was saying there. This is basically an exchange that's talking about like what happened with Brexit, that basically there used to be a much stronger whistleblower protection under the EU, but because the UK was voted out like of Europe, the UK still does have their own whistleblower law, but it's seen as far weaker and the enforcement more patchy than what the EU directive was. So Sweet Pea then says, well, what else can we do that can incentivize him? And Burgess then offers some potential ideas. He says, doing the right thing. I mean, that's usually bullshit to human ears. Relief from the burden of the lie, relief from the threat of perpetrators, etc. And Sweet Pea says, relief from prosecution. Burgess then is like, I say this with respect, but sources tend to be sensitive. And if he thinks that you're going to profit off of this, like he's probably not going to be a great source. He says, Miss Golightly, do you think Jim was right about these guys? And Sweet Pea says he was more right than he knew. So Kwabana then asks, how should they play it? Because they're going to go see Tony Day and try to see if he'll talk. And Sweet Pea says, let's just try to snooker him. So try to trap him. So from here, they march into Tony's office. And Sweet Pea, she takes off her glasses because she wants him to see her face.
Yeah.
And she marches right up to him and she says, so underqualified, so overpaid. It was too good to be true because it actually wasn't fucking true. Tony then gets up and he turns on the television to clearly hide the fact that they are talking about this. And he doesn't want someone to hear them and says, shut the fuck up as he walks toward the window. And Sweet Pea says, and now the hook is in your gut and you have two outsiders walking into your office saying, we know. Tony says, well, I'm not on the hook for anything because as of yesterday, my tender equity was at $80 million. Sweet Pea says, at what point did this start? Did it start with juicing the numbers for the funding round? Was it the funding round or was it the IPO? How many people are complicit in this? God knows it must have been exhausting to live with this compounding growth, each fat lie relying on the next. I mean, I don't think there's a more tired man on earth right now. Kwabana says, yeah, and you're the second most tired man at tender, which who's the first?
Whitney.
Whitney or Henry?
I think it's Whitney because they're talking about the fatigue of living with a lie.
Yeah, that's true. Sweet Pea then asks, did Halberstrom ever threaten you? But he makes it seem like no, because she says, no, pay enough people to follow top-down orders and then pay them some more to look the other way. I bet these people here don't even think of themselves as accessories.
I think what she's doing is she's forcing Tony to acknowledge that he didn't have to be threatened to do the wrong thing. All they had to do was dangle a highly paying role in front of him.
Fair. Yeah. And so Kwabana then says, in the room, the Africans exchange the bribes while the white men talk. Was every acquisition as empty as Swift GC? So Sweet Pea then says, Tony, you assume someone is listening to you and watching you. If it's not Halberstrom, who? Tony looks at her and just says, assume? Kwabana says, you know? And Tony then says, whispering, I want to know exactly how to minimize my liability before I make any kind of disclosure, and I want counsel before that. But my question was, he's saying that he's not really afraid of Whitney. He knows people are listening to and watching him. Who
I don't
is
think
he
he's
afraid
saying
of?
he's not afraid of Whitney. I think he's saying, I didn't have to be threatened to do this. Correct. I knowingly did the wrong thing and I knowingly got in bed with these people. And now I'm sitting here living with this fear because I'm in bed with bad people. And now I want a lifeline out. But like, he's not a good guy. He's not some like moral guy who was threatened to do this at gunpoint. He did
definitely not.
He came willingly.
I just thought there was someone else who was pulling the strings, was what I had thought. Over Whitney, even though I think it is Whitney. But.
Possible. If it is someone, it's someone we haven't met yet. And then we
it's Jonah, but yes.
Reveal. Yeah, it's not Jonah. Jonah.
I know. I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly. Jonah can barely take care of himself. So I think it's more just about the implication that and the reminder that there are no good guys here. That this man is by no means a victim, and we're not supposed to feel bad for himself that he's now afraid.
Oh, yeah, no, I don't think anyone feels bad for this guy. I honestly don't even trust this guy. I think he's still probably in with Whitney. I mean, we still don't know if it was like...
If he's going to be a double agent now.
Yeah, I would be very concerned that might be the case. Like, regardless, that man came to attack Sweet Pea, whether he gave the directive or if he knew someone was listening and was going to give the directive, he had her, like, tell him where he was. She didn't just offer that information like, hey, I'm at this place, so in case you want to come talk. No. He said, where are you? She then told him. So I don't even know that he was ever going to even like go freaking talk to Jim. Like, I don't know that he was ever going to be trying to come clean. So
I do think he was going to talk to Jim because I think he thought that there was a pathway through this reporter because that's what I think like most people would think. Like, oh, there's going to be a pathway to immunity or whatever from prosecution.
Fair.
Like, I'll be fine. But I do think it is really important, this phrase of like, you must be the most tired person, that there's this fatigue that comes from living a lie and that there's this burden of it. And I think we've had this theme running throughout where we have Harper and Eric talking about, okay, what would the victory look like? And it was, hey, the victory is knowing that I didn't lie for Eric, like, which I think is such an interesting thing because it means to me that he feels like he's living a lie in so many other parts of his life, that it wouldn't be like this moral sanctity of taking down this bad company. It would be, I finally get to not be living a lie about something in my life. There is this fatigue that clearly they are implying that he is experiencing by living this lie. And so I just want to keep that seed in the back of our mind. I don't think it's an accident that they keep talking about that.
Yeah. So Kwabana says, okay, we'll fly you to London, buy you a ticket, no trail to you, introduce you to Edward Burgess, formalize a path of protection through Fin Digest. And Tony says, yeah, but what have you got without me? The board, the government, the auditors, the investors, the research analysts, they've got no incentive to believe you, so they won't. They'll all say more conjecture that you guys are paid to believe is fact. Sweet Pea then says, do you want to answer to us or do you want to answer to law enforcement? And Tony says, do you ever get the feeling you're a little above your fucking station here? Sweet Pea's like, never in my life, sir, because she is. She's definitely fearless. She also says, do you fancy to pay for my fucking nose job too? And Kwabana says, because we can add actual bodily harm to your list of charges. Tony says, this isn't something that happens overnight. And Sweet Pea says, we can engineer your flight and start telling your story of your victimization. You can be the victim, not the perpetrator. So it's so interesting that it's like, I'm a victim. And, you know, with the Henry, like, be a victim. And it's like, here, you're clearly a bad dude, but like, pretend that you're the victim.
Well, it's also, it feels a little like Sweet Pea telling her own story about how first she was like, I refuse to be a victim of whatever Rishi did to me. But then it was actually like, I want to be acknowledged as the victim by my mom.
Yeah.
The question is she living a lie too?
Yeah, right. So Tony then looks outside the window and he looks like he's going to say something, but then he walks back, turns the TV off and says, I'll consider it. Thanks for coming, and sits back down at his desk. So from here, this next scene was interesting because you see Eric in bed with someone. There is a young woman with dark black hair that he's comforting, and then he kisses your head. I first thought that was Harper. Did you too, or was that just me?
No.
But the way that it's shot,
don't
like,
discount
you don't
that.
really see her face.
Don't discount that. I think that there's some importance to that we see him playing the father. And you assumed that he was playing the father to Harper, not to his own daughter.
Well, because we had just seen her. We hadn't even realized that he had made contact with his daughter. He had seemed totally like kind of separated. He thought about calling her. He never did. And the way that they had shot it, it was like kind of overhead so that like you saw the hair. You kind of could see, it was like, you couldn't really see the face. It was more of just the way that it was shot versus like head on. So that's why initially I thought that. But then he walks out of the room where Candace is, and Eric says she's hollowed out. So basically, like, clearly this is taking a toll on her. She's probably lost a lot of weight. And Candace says, I'm not sure what lesson we can teach her that she hasn't learned already. Eric then asks, mind if she stays over? She's exhausted. You should stay too. Candace says, like, are you sure? He says yes, tells Then he tells Candace to like take the bedroom with Lily. So I'm not really sure what that's doing for him because like then he's sleeping on the couch with them staying there. Like it should have been like he wanted to like stay with his daughter and get quality
I think
time.
there's this like playing house thing that's happening where he's been playing house with Harper and now he's playing house with his own family. He's kind of trying it on for size. Like, you know, and because remember, as Candace is going back into the bedroom, she says, I just wanted to say, don't mistake regret for love. The girls won't. Meaning this has not fixed anything by you suddenly being this fatherly figure towards her. And so I think what we then see in the next scene is him coming to grips with the fact that him trying to play house with his real family instead of play house with Harper is a lie.
Yeah. But I will say, I mean, there definitely is like a path for redemption. It's like, dude, if she got into the markets, like, I mean, she would be Harper 2.0. I mean, because literally it's true. You disagree?
Because she's so awful and vicious.
I mean, Harper was like, I literally was like that at her age.
I don't know that being an evil middle schooler or high schooler necessarily is the great predictor of being successful in the markets.
Sorry, it just has to be like if she was ultimately interested in something that her father then found interesting and then they could share that, I do think that he would probably want to take her under his wing the way that he did with Harper. I think that the reason that he is using Harper is like they have the same intellectual interests and the same like wanting to win that's aligned. And so it makes it so that he's able to kind of play out that fatherly figure role for her because they're interested in the same thing. Their attention is both going after the same thing. So I feel like if his daughter, and again, she shouldn't have to do this, but I'm just saying, if there was a world where her daughter's like, I want to be a trader, I want to be a salesperson, I want to work in like rates and stuff and like run a little macro hedge fund. I think all of a sudden it would be, oh my God, you're interested in like the business that I'm in. And I think that there would be that path. But again, it shouldn't be on her to do what her dad is doing for him to like love her and give her the attention. But
I don't know. I hear what you're saying. I don't necessarily buy it.
But why would it be that he's so fixated on Harper? And I think it's because he sees, maybe it's that he sees some of himself in her.
That's
maybe he
what
sees
I see. That's
an interesting point. Whereas like he looks at his daughters as these spoiled people who have wanted for nothing.
Yes.
He's given them everything.
Yes.
Harper was this kid who grew up with nothing like him and his immigrant father. That's interesting. Okay, that's a very good point. And it's ironic that it's all his fault. That he gave his kid.
That was the conversation at the beginning when he was like, this is what happens when kids don't want for anything. And I totally agree, by the way. Like, listen, both of our children are all growing up very privileged. And it's like, what do you do? How do you instill a vicious work ethic in children who have grown up knowing nothing but privilege? That's something I think about every single day. And my kids are nowhere near as privileged as Eric's are. So like
no $10 million trust fund, Jen?
No. Well, let's do a little better with this podcast, then we'll talk.
Yeah, seriously.
But like
But so anyway, I do think that's interesting that it really became so much about who she was at her core because of the upbringing of being someone who came from nothing. I thought it was more like she's the spoiled brat but like you can be a spoiled brat and then ultimately like kind of step out of it. Like people.
Yeah, and maybe, right? But the only way you step out of that is through good parenting. And Eric doesn't have the time, energy, or desire to do that. So he is 100% responsible for this either way.
I mean, it's funny. I do think that the idea of like good parenting, there's been so many studies about the fact that like at the end of the day, it's actually less about the parenting and it's more about the kids and the people that kids are surrounded by. And also the resiliency of just how kids are that yes, like be a good parent. But also, I mean, usually being a good parent means like love. It's less about everything else.
It doesn't mean doting on them hand and foot. There are ways to love your children that are not like catering to their every desire. We've had that conversation about gentle parenting versus not here, right?
Yeah.
I think there's two types of people. I think there's people who have great parents who instill in them that work ethic without having them go through actual trauma and hardship to get there. And I think that there's bad parents and then kids react to that trauma by saying, you know what, I want to be anything but you. And I think like you can end up in a great place through either of those paths. I think that just as much as there are those people who end up in a great place because they either had great parents who taught them the right lessons at the right time, or there's people who reacted to it, then there's people who fail. And it's because they had parents who thought that love meant catering to their every desire and giving them everything they wanted. And that ends in disaster. Or they had crappy parents who traumatized them and their trauma traumatized them, to Harper's point.
Yeah. Although again, I think it's funny because it's like at the end of the day, you know, we talked to A-Rod, we interviewed him on our podcast and he was talking about like growing up, it's like his dad left and his mom had to work multiple jobs. And it's like it instilled a fire in him to
That's
be
great.
someone.
That's example 2. That's you had the crappy dad and you never wanted to be that. So you became a great person by not being that crappy
But there you could have another child in the exact same environment and it went the complete opposite way. So I think it just so much also is dependent on the parents and then also depending on the child and like how they respond to that environment. So, but anyway, we then see Eric, he's lying on the couch, he's unable to sleep, he's tossing and turning, and then he goes and he sees his wife and his daughter. And I think he realizes, to your point, that he's just like, he's a fucking failure. And so he then takes his phone and he calls Hotel Girl, goes to see him, and he makes a comment, "You always have a room here," she says, "on standby." So I think your assessment of like, is everybody hired by, I would be very suspicious because I would be.
No. I'm glad you had the same read.
Only when you said it. I didn't at first. This is only after you said it at the very beginning.
Being like way too Carmen Sandiego or whatever. Like, I don't know.
They literally wanted to paint him as someone who was like ties to the Cultural Revolution. They have their like eyes without a face. They are watching him. Like they are definitely keeping tabs on this fund, on him. And so I would almost now, it's funny because I did not think that at first. But then again, the fact that he literally says, "You always have a room here," I now am reading into your line of thinking, which is like, I feel like they're all being watched.
Dear listener, we are always recording having not watched the next episode. So we have no idea.
We have no idea.
We might go down really dark rabbit holes that go nowhere.
Right. But again, I still think that like this statement was an interesting point, unless it's just casual chit chat, which I don't think they put casual chit chat in.
I do think that they were confirming that, at the very least, that she is in fact
she's
a prostitute, and she is not some woman that he like met at the bar and had this great connection with.
Fair. So she says on standby, and again in my notes I literally wrote, so clearly she's a prostitute. But anyway, so he asks her to make him feel big, and then she says, "Yes, daddy," which goes back to like, it's all of these awful encounters. It like, I hate that they always are putting that in there,
Me too.
Whatever. And then he looks in the mirror and there's ominous music. And I literally also wrote, worth noting, this is the first we've seen of gross Eric this season, basically him now hiring a prostitute as a reaction to feeling like a failure as a father. But this is the first of gross Eric. Well, that and like the Sweet Pea thing. But again, I'm going to maybe give him a pass that it was just someone forwarded to him and he like didn't know what it was, but still no. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that bookends this experience with Eric's family, that we had the introduction of the pornographic content through Sweet Pea and then him going out and pursuing the relationship with the prostitute, back to the scene that we had such different reads on in the steakhouse with Yasmin, that it was like, I didn't think he was coming to it from a sexual place. And I think she misinterpreted what he said, but then he ended up taking it to that sexual place, right? So it's like the seed gets planted and then there's this follow through that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's like the opposite of manifesting. It's like he's like trying to, So then we go to the next scene and Sweet Pea is back from Accra, walking into her apartment through her lobby, and Harper puts her hand on her shoulder and she just like jumps out of her skin. And so she says that she's like all jacked up and can't sleep, all this stuff. But Harper then, as she sees Sweet Pea's face, she says, "God, it's much worse than he said it is," which is like the worst thing you can say to someone. Like, you look awful. I mean, but also, it's so much
speaking
worse.
Of appearances, Harper this season has been like power suit, the hair. I read an interview with Mayala where she said, like, I wanted the most expensive, time-consuming, complex hair possible. Like, that's what we executed. Here she's got her hair in this kind of bun. She's not in her power suit and her heels. She looks very diminutive in stature, and Mayala is very short. Like, she is an incredibly tiny woman. But she's wearing like a cardigan. She looks like a mom here.
And actually, her whole demeanor in this scene is so not Harper.
Correct.
So she comes over and she apologizes. She says, "I'm sorry. I know you said you didn't want to see anyone. I just had to check in." And she gives Sweet Pea a hug. Sweet Pea is upset. She says she hasn't heard from Tony Day, and then acknowledges she's amped up. She's obviously high on adrenaline, couldn't take herself off the ceiling, didn't sleep on the plane. Harper says, "Don't worry, I'm going to present our findings at Pierre's conference. Even if we had the actual smoking gun, they would say we manufactured the gun and the fucking smoke," which is true, because that's the whole point with, again, the short selling stuff is like, they're going to just be up, they're going to have their PR spin machine.
Whatever, all these things. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sweet Pea says they'll call bullshit on it again. Harper then says, "Let them. I'm going to lay it out brick by brick it will be undeniable. Back to the thing that Eric had said about her. I'm
No, that
so
she
sorry.
said about herself.
Oh, you're right that she said about her, and then he said that she was, but you're right. She said it first. And she said, I'm so sorry that I let this happen to you. It is my responsibility. Sweet Pea says, no, you didn't. Don't take this away from me. Look, I work for you. You don't have to act like this out of some pastoral compassion. And I want to be paid. Do we understand each other? And I think that this is actually an interesting point because like, if you're watching this, you might think, oh, wait, is she just like not getting paid? No. This is like a hedge fund. They're getting paid. I mean, freaking Eric is paying $100,000 a month to live in a freaking hotel room. She's saying that she wants to make a big payday if this thing goes well. So when people in like the hedge fund world say, I want to get paid, it means they want to get a big fucking bonus if the fund does well. So that's what she means. Like, I want to make sure that I am getting economics in this trade when you make your millions plus, I want to make millions plus.
But it's not just that. She wants to make this very clear that this is transactional. That this is, Harper is coming to her in this motherly way, being like, I take responsibility for what happened to you. She is acting out with Sweet Pea what she wished her mother had done with her. And Sweet Pea is like, no, you don't know. I have full agency here. I'm not your puppet. I'm not your plaything. Harper has been, since day one, protective of Sweet Pea. The first time we met her, she totally rebuffed her. And then she was like, you know what? I like a woman who doesn't leave money on the table. When Sweet Pea was talking about the fact that her porn got exposed, Harper was like, that wasn't your fault. She's been so adamantly protective of Sweet Pea in a way that she isn't protective of anybody else.
Yeah.
Sweet Pea is her surrogate daughter.
But I will say, I do think that what she was also trying to say is that if this thing goes well, I did this. Like, this was on the back of Sweet Pea kind of being detective, finding all of this stuff, and basically saying to Harper, don't take credit for my fucking work. I want to at least be acknowledged for the brain. I mean, you had said, like, she's always the one. She's the one who freaking gave them the Pure Point trade. She's the one who's done everything.
She is the brains behind the whole thing.
Brains.
She's the smartest person on this show.
Yes, but she's basically,
she's the only competent person on this damn show.
But I think that's really what she was reacting to, and less about her rebuffing her motherly instincts and more being like,
both happening.
Don't take credit for what I did. I found this thing in Accra. I wanted to go. I went and I got this information. Don't you say I put you in this situation. I put myself in this situation.
Yep.
And I found this thing because of myself. Don't you try to take that from me. So I totally got what she was saying, even though I feel bad for Harper in that, like, it's almost like she's trying a little bit to, like, again, be a human and like have human connection. Like, she lost her mom. I mean, and she's getting it from Eric.
Went to, right? I mean, and granted, obviously Sweet Pea was the one who was like the one who, but she didn't go to Kwabana first. She went to Sweet Pea.
Yeah. And so Sweet Pea adds, and look, I'll tell you this now in case he tells you it himself, but Kwabana and we hooked up. And I mean, I assumed it was casual with you both. I don't know. It just feels like transgressions are best dealt with head on so they don't fester. Harper says, no, it was casual, meaning like, oh no, she actually did care and it was probably more than casual. Sweet Pea says, good. Harper says, I really appreciate your honesty, and then asks to come in and keep her company. And Sweet Pea says, I'm really fucking tired. And then Harper leaves as Sweet Pea goes into her apartment and puts down her stuff. But I just felt so like Harper's trying to be like, again, but we have seen this with her and Yasmin last season. Like, we had seen her be a little bit motherly with Yaz. Remember when
Yasmin murdered her dad?
Yes, but also like, she did want to protect Yasmin.
Only after she murdered her dad.
Agreed. But she still, when people are in vulnerable states, I feel like she does want to protect them. And it's only when they start to act like alpha that then she goes alpha against them too. But
you know what the sign of a true friend is? It's not, people are always like, true friends are there for you when things are going wrong. I think it's actually way easier to be there for someone when things are going wrong than it is to be there to celebrate their success. Yeah. And Harper never celebrates anyone else's success, but she's there when people are friggin' murdering people or getting traumatized. And by the way, when Sweet Pea goes into her apartment and puts her stuff down, the way that they filmed her was fucking terrifying, because they film her, they show her walking in and show this open doorway behind her. So it's like, I was like, there's going to be someone waiting for her apartment.
I didn't think
Sweet Pea's going to get killed. There's someone, like, it's the way you film a horror movie where you show the open door into the darkness behind the person. I was like, there's going to be a jump scare. I was terrified. But also, Sweet Pea's so tired. So I just want to come back to this theme that we've got now of the fatigue of living a lie. I think that there's the fatigue that Tony has, the fatigue that Eric has, and now it's, what is Sweet Pea's fatigue? To me, it's Sweet Pea's fatigue comes from maintaining this facade of, I'm not a victim, but like she is the freaking victim here. Like she did get assaulted and beat up, and she's had to be so strong. And she tried to use her sexuality to take herself out of that, to be like, no, I'm in control, whatever. But like, it is truly awful what happened to her. I am traumatized on her behalf. Like that is absolutely awful and terrifying. And I would have wanted Harper to come and stay in my house because I wouldn't want to be alone.
Yeah.
Because I'd be thinking about the open door behind me that someone is going to come and jump out of the shadows.
Yep.
So it's so poignant seeing Sweet Pea here. And after she rejects Harper and keeps her at arm's length, they're repeating the cycle in my mind of what Harper went through to some extent with her mom.
Yeah. So next scene, we're back at the office of Stern Tao. Harper goes to the office and sees Kwabana. He says that he checked Eric's room and his wife and kid are in there asleep. And so he's like, this is making me rethink our whole setup. Harper asks where Eric is, and Kwabana's like, I have no idea. But anyway.
But the reason the setup needs to be rethought is the setup is that of a family. And like the fund has become a family, whether they like it or not. And every single character is rejecting it in their own way.
Yeah. So Harper then says, how is Sweet Pea? And Kwabana says she was like a dog with a bone. Harper says, really? And again, I think she's like waiting for him to confess.
Not only that, remember Kwabana's joking name was that he was named Dogfucker Bannerman.
Yes, this is true. Good catch. Kwabana says, tenacious. You know, it's really admirable how she's recovered from all that shit she went through. Are you okay? And so remember, she has not talked to him about her mom and the fact that her mom just fucking died. He doesn't know. So he's having this conversation like Sweet Pea just went through all this stuff and she did. But Harper's obviously going through a lot too. And he has no idea. And so Harper says, it's fine. We're more than fine. We're very close. And Kwabana thinks they're talking about their relationship. He's like, close? Us? And then she says, to floodlighting this whole fucking underside. So they were starting to have two different conversations. And so Kwabana says, I spent so much time listening to my higher brain and its love of complexity, and all along, your gut's telling you what's truly right. And Harper in this, like, I don't even know how to describe her voice. She just goes, yeah, trust your gut, I guess. Like, sort of just like
she's elsewhere. Her mind is elsewhere at this point.
Yep. And Kwabana then looks at her and says, don't ever fucking liquidate my positions again, okay? I'm not some boy. We fuck each other, but not like that. Is that clear? And Harper just says, crystal. She then gets up. She says, I need to get materials together for this talk. And then she says, if anyone calls for me, I'm busy. I'm working, which I assume meaning like my family calls, my brother calls. Nope, don't fucking get me. And this is when then Eyes Without a Face starts to play. Kwabana puts his head back in the chair, flashes to Sweet Pea, who we see first in the bathroom, and then she goes to her couch and she just starts to cry and the credits come on. Let me pause. Jen, any commentary on this last scene with her and Kwabana or Sweet Pea before we like talk a little bit about the title?
I just think there was this moment where they flirted with the idea of Harper being able to let down her guard around Kwabana and let him in and be vulnerable with him. And the closest she could ever get is offering him a job, right? Like that is highest and best from Harper. Because here, to your point, he asked, you okay? You know, like that was her opportunity to be like, dude, actually my mom just died. I'm going through all this. I'm sorry that I liquidated your positions, by the way. She could have said that.
Also, I know that you slept with Sweet Pea and I'm upset about that. Like, are we?
You know, and it's funny. I think she's upset, but almost in this like, yep, okay, I knew this wasn't going to work out. Like I've now reaffirmed my worldview. So while I'm disappointed, because it's reaffirmed my worldview and I don't have to question my ability to become vulnerable about someone, this is a lot safer place for me to be for Harper rather than being able to be vulnerable with him. So I think there's now more dysfunction than ever in our Stern Tao family. And it's happening as they're on the precipice of the idea actually working out. So it's like they were all like this when the idea was shit.
By the way, it's funny you do that because that's the Henry and Whitney.
Whitney. But, you know, now that the idea is working out, our characters almost seem farther apart than ever. Sweet Pea seems farther from Harper and Kwabana is farther from Harper. Eric is farther from his family. I think because it's HBO, like all joy always has to turn to ashes in your mouth. They can't even enjoy this moment if they got it. It's Sweet Pea sobbing alone, understandably so. And I think
she went from this like giddy high where she is jumping for joy with Kwabana and then sobbing alone on her couch.
Yep.
So
you never really fully get to enjoy it.
Nope. All right. So really quickly on the title. So we talked about how you had said your initial title about The Great Gatsby. Then there was the Shiesties for the ski mask where you only have the eyes. There was my watching thing. And then the actual song itself, again, I don't know a lot about it, but I looked it up and apparently Billy Idol released a song in 1983 that per ChatGPT describes it as a moody emotional ballad that explores the theme of emotional detachment, betrayal, and regret in a relationship. In short, this is like the summary. It says, Eyes Without a Face is about emotional alienation and hollowness of loved, lost, or betrayed. It's both a personal confession and a metaphysical reflection on how people can look the same, but no longer feel the same, which like you kind of saw nonstop with Harper. And then it also says that the title reference comes from some French horror film, Eyes Without a Face, in which a doctor attempts to restore his daughter's face after a disfiguring accident, which also is interesting in light of what just happened to Sweet Pea getting punched in the face and talking about basically needing a nose job.
So let me be very clear. This was a French horror film about a surgeon who kidnaps women to take their faces off and graft their faces onto his disfigured daughter. So like it's not just like like his daughter like has this like facial.
This reminds me of like Face Off. By the way, one of my favorite movies of all time.
Such a good movie.
A different story.
But
okay, gross.
Listen, I do think that there is also this theme. So we've talked about the voyeurism. We've talked about kind of like watching over the decay of morality and all these other things. But there's also this sense of dissociation, right? That like you're wearing these different faces, but who are you kind of behind the mask that is also happening? And thinking about Sweet Pea in particular. Like this is the Sweet Pea episode in my mind, where we are really seeing who Sweet Pea is. We've always known what she can do, but now we're getting a sense of the why. And Kwabana keeps saying to her, you always have a why, right? Everything she has done has been with a why. And now we're getting at it, which is she did porn because she was 19. She needed money. We know she came from this, impoverished background. She has been so aspirational and she has been using her wits to get ahead, and it's her body that's been holding her back. And so I think Sweet Pea has been dealing with being torn between, this sexual expression of herself that's the quick and easy path to power, and her brain being like the way that she actually is doing so well. And I think that's just, she's like the anti-Yasmin. And that's why I think Harper is so drawn to her and wants to help her and wants to mother her. Not because she's a victim necessarily, but because like Harper sees in her the daughter that I think Eric sees in Harper. Like you're the me who has this trauma that they need to overcome. And for her, it's her mom, and her, it's her mom in a different way. So I loved this episode. Yeah. Like, again, I keep saying, I think that there's so much here that may not be evident at face value, Eyes Without a Face. And I do think my Gatsby interpretation was wrong, sadly, other than the sense that Tender is this house of cards, right? Tender is Great Gatsby, who just like showed up and was Mr. Wonderful and is really just an illusion. So that's all I can get from my Great Gatsby reference that I had high hopes for.
All right. So then finally, bullish and bearish. Who are we bullish on? I mean, clearly
Stern Tao.
Quad. Yeah. Stern Tao. And then, I mean, bearish now on poor Henry. Because again, he's the useful idiot. Like
I just missed seeing Tender this episode. Like having an episode without Yaz. What are we doing?
Yeah. So anyway, thank you guys. We always have so much fun doing this. And by the way, if you are enjoying, please rate and review and send to a friend. We will be back next Sunday, 10:01, as soon as the episode airs. And any final words, Jen?
I cannot believe that we are in the second half of this season and we are heading towards the finish line so quickly. This is our favorite thing that we do. We're so glad we get to do it with you guys. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you're enjoying it as much as we are.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.